Okay, this lesson is on the many ways in which the United States makes a lot of money off of war in the Middle East. Alright, and I'm making this lecture today because I'm having trouble finding anyone to honestly discuss this with me. Alright, so I'm just going to make a video, and the problem with making a video is, no one watches it. Alright, they'll all attack it, but no one watches it. Okay, so to begin with, I want to start here. Number one, in the big picture, the United States spends more on defense than the rest of the top 10 spenders combined. All right, so here's the United States, how much they spend on military. This is back in 2012, 2013. And here are the next 9 largest spenders. All right, the U.S. spends more than all these combined. So number 2 is China, followed by United Kingdom, Great Britain, then Japan, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Germany, India, France, and Brazil. So Russia's way down here, the big scary threat, Russia. All right, U.S. spends more than all these combined. All right, so I showed you, and to really understand it, you have to go back and watch all the videos on my lectures on how, exchange theory and how the United States creates conflict and war in the Middle East. All right. So without that, you may say, "Oh, that's not true." Well, I can't go back and teach it all to you. But so let's say there's war, conflict in the Middle East. Now we have war. That means you have rapid consumption of weapons. In wartime, you have a do or die, life or death situation, and you expend massive amounts of weapons. All right. So if you're expending massive amounts of weapons, you got to buy weapons to replace it during wartime. So you have large weapons purchases. Now, how do Middle East countries buy these weapons? Well, they can take out loans, and then they got to pay big interest, servicing those loans. All right. But eventually, they got to buy those weapons by selling oil, because that's the main resources in those countries. So they sell more oil. If you sell more oil, you flood the market. With so much oil in the market, prices fall. Right? Now, that's a great benefit to the major oil companies, who are more involved in downstream these days, having lost control of foreign oil production through the 60s and 80s. We'll talk about that. All right. So also, even more important to that is, low oil prices are a huge benefit to not just the U.S. economy, but to the world economy. All right, we'll talk more about that coming up after I give this brief overview. All right. Now, if they're making large weapons purchases, that means weapons producers are making large weapons sales, and there's huge profits in war. Huge profits in weapons. For example, I'll just give you one quick example here. This is a cannon round, 6-inch diameter artillery round, 155 millimeters, which is about 6 inches. All right, and one of these costs $250,000, $260,000 for one of these. And during wartime, you're popping these off like popcorn. Pop, 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 pop. Bam, bam, bam. Right? You're expending these at a high rate. Now, to compare, each one of these is worth 5 Cadillac, CTSs or something like that. All right? All right, so there's high profits. I'll explain more why weapons are so profitable in a little bit. But here's another example. One airplane sold to Iraq, all right, because Iraq now buys its weapons from the United States after we invaded them. Each one of these is $167 million for one airplane. All right. Now it's a package deal, which involves both the plane, training, and maintenance support. But it's very pricey. One helicopter, $35 million. Okay. So, high profits. Now, let's say you have war in the Middle East. Not all nations are at war, but you destabilize the whole region, which means even the nations that are not at war are threatened. So they need to increase their security by increasing their weapons purchases. So how do they pay for those weapons? By selling oil. Right? Dropping oil prices, benefiting our economy, making big profits for oil companies. Okay, now, whenever you have a war in a country, you have a great amount of destruction, a massive amount of destruction. Just take a look at Iraq. We invade Iraq, create a war there. It's a massive amount of destruction. It's urban warfare. Cities are being blown apart. We're bombing the hell out of cities. And whenever you have a lot of destruction, what do you must have? You must have a lot of reconstruction. And this is a big money maker. It makes big profits for corporations. It makes big profits for favored companies. For example, during the first Gulf War, right, they set up a phone hotline for reconstruction of Kuwait, right, where any company could call in, but it didn't matter. It was just a recording. You left a message, but no one responded because only 3 companies got all the contracts. They monopolized all the contracts to reconstruct Kuwait. It was Halliburton, KBR, and Bechtel. Those 3 companies, favorite political companies. Halliburton's a Bush company. All right. So they're making huge profits, right? And to do reconstruction, how do these countries pay for reconstruction? They got to sell oil. Drops prices again. All right? Now, another way of making money off of war these days is through privatization of war. Right? And the first thing I want to talk about is something called LOGCAP. LOGCAP stands for Logistics Civilian Augmentation Program. What that means is, if you watch like old movies of World War II and so forth, you see that the supply corps is providing most of the logistics, the supplies, all right, feeding people, housing people, building bases, building whatever you need, right, providing fuel, all right. Now this is all done by private corporations, and there's huge profits, right? Often no bid contracts, often cost plus contracts. For example, Halliburton got the contract to reconstruct Iraq oil industry after we went into Iraq and busted up that country, right? And they got a no-bid contract. And then Halliburton, throughout the whole Iraq invasion war, got the contract, the overall total contract to control logistics. All right, the vast majority of which they just subcontracted out to other companies, but they got a piece of every dollar that went into logistics, even if they did none of the work and only subcontracted it out. All right, they controlled all the money, and so there's huge money made off of it. All right, and now that also includes private military security contractors, and what these are mercenaries. So warfare is privatized not just with logistics, but with warfighters. You have privatized mercenary warfighters. Big money made here. All right, KBR's doing it. Blackwater's doing it. All right, so we're going to talk more about this in detail later, so I'll just save this. I talked about cost-plus contractors, which encourage fraud, waste, and abuse. I'll explain how that's done in a little bit after this brief overview. All right, so 9. It helps with the balance of trade. All right, now I imagine that only economists are going to really understand balance of trade, and really the great impact there is in the balance of trade you got 2 things. You got capital accounts, you got current accounts, right? And if you have an imbalance in one, you have to counter it with an opposite imbalance in the other. All right. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to have big problems in currency values. You're going to have divergence of markets. So in a trade, you're going to have 2 different markets develop with 2 different currency values. All right, and it's going to obstruct trade. What's the best way of saying this? So one of the things you got to do is to help this trade, you got to recycle currency. and recycling currency helps currency values. Let me give an example with China. Maybe that'll help. All right. So, China right now, the big buzzword is currency manipulation, right? And what's kind of going on is this. China makes things really cheap, right? They're improving in their technology, but it used to be they're making like low-cost Walmart-type products really cheap, right? Selling a lot of stuff to the United States because it's cheap, right? Now what happens, to purchase those Chinese goods, dollars must be sent over to China, and those dollars are exchanged for yuan, the Chinese currency, and then the yuan is used to purchase those goods. Now, if China's not purchasing U.S. goods, right, there is an imbalance of current accounts. Chinese goods are coming to the United States, dollars are going over there, but it's not being recycled back, right, because they're not buying our stuff. All right. Now, what's going to happen is the dollars are going to pile up. More and more dollars over there, and they're not using it to the point that dollars are useless, which means dollar value is going to fall. And what that means is the exchange rate between yuan and dollars is going to rise, where yuan value is going to increase. Now, with increasing yuan value, what that means is Chinese prices go up. Now, that's not good for China, because if the prices go up, pretty soon they're priced out of the market and they lose their trade. So what they do is the government says, hey, it says to their companies, hey, right, we got all this extra yuan. We can print more yuan if you want, right? Give us your dollars and we'll exchange it for yuan, right? So all the Chinese companies that have pockets full of dollars, right? Exchange their dollars for yuan, right? And then the Chinese government takes all the dollars that they get, and then they go back and reinvest it in the United States. That's a capital account. That's currency. That's financial resources, and that flows back to the United States, usually in the purchase of Treasury securities, bonds. All right. Now, there's a benefit to that. So what that does is that decreases dollar value in China, but also it recycles currency back to the United States, which is needed, right, to have capital for investment, to keep interest rates down, all right, and they're buying up those bonds, all right, sustaining bond value, which helps keep interest rates down, all right. Basically, it provides capital availability in the United States, all right. So it's not, in a sense, it's not all that bad, right? The thing about it is there has to be fair trade, though. All right, I'm not going to get into all that stuff. All right. So it's recycled currency hurts currency values and thus sustains trade. Also increases domestic money supply, keeping interest rates down. All right. I think I explained that, hopefully. 10. Another thing is, when you have war, conflict in the Middle East, you can flip a client state. For example, most of the countries in the Middle East used to be client states of the Soviet Union, buying their weapons from the Soviet Union. All right. Now, right, that's all been flipped to the United States, except for Syria, including Iraq. We invade Iraq. All right. What do? Right. Iraq now buys weapons from us, not from Russia. All right. They're a client state of the United States. We flipped them. We invade their ass, and then we flip them as a client state. All right. I'll explain more of this later. Now, so what do I say here? Okay, large weapons purchases, weapons reconstruction requires oil, right? Oil nations, they have debt, and they got to take out loans, and then when they take out loans, there's big profits from servicing those loans. Right, so banks make big profits here. That's what I'm saying there. All right, 12. So another thing that wars can do is protect the petrodollar. For example, Saddam Hussein abandoned the petrodollar in October of 2000, and he went to the euro. All right. Now, the petrodollar goes a long way in staving off inflation with expanding money supply. All right. So petrodollars are a huge way of sustaining dollar value if you're expanding the money supply beyond growth in the economy, all right, which should be inflationary. All right. Now, the threat is not just Iraq abandoning the petrodollar, but the example it creates, right? And the threat that other nations may do the same, including all the rest of the OPEC nations abandoning the petrodollar. All right. So this was not just about forcing Iraq back onto the petrodollar, which it did. I mean, that's one of the first things we did, right? The Coalition Provisional Authority, which was basically a U.S.-controlled government in Iraq, all right? They did de-Baathification. They dismantled the entire Iraqi military, and they threw Iraq back on the petrodollar right away. All right, 13. All right, this gets into the Federal Reserve. Okay, so here, I guess I'll talk about petrodollar down here more. So petrodollar is oil traded in dollars, exclusively in dollars. It helps sustain dollar demand, all right, maintaining dollar value, even with big government spending and expansion of the money supply, which could be inflationary, right? So it helps sustain deficit spending, finance with bonds, all right, sustaining the trade and current accounts deficit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is try to explain that now, all right? And all this stuff, honestly, I believe all this stuff is so damn straightforward, right? It's so damn obvious. Right? I'm not saying anything like really, really complicated right now. So now this may be complicated more for people, all right? Maybe just economists will understand it if you're honest, an honest economist, all right? So I kind of want to explain deficit spending and how this can lead to inflationary pressures, all right? So the big sources of deficit spending in the 2000s have been, number one was really the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, under the Bush watch, all right? And that required bank bailouts. That was a big source of money being spent, right? And that was also followed by Obama's stimulus, program, spending stimulus, right? And the Iraq invasion war, right? And wars in Afghanistan. Whole war on terror was a big source of money. Okay. Now, you had big spending going on with the Iraq war, the bailout stimulus program, right? And this causes deficit spending. You're spending more than you're taking in. So how can you respond to this? If you're spending more than you're taking in, you're going more and more into debt, right? Well, what do? Do you raise taxes, right? No! Hell no, you don't raise taxes, not if you want to get reelected, not unless you want to hurt the economy. So what you do instead is you finance your deficit spending with debt. Now, how does the government finance all their deficit spending with debt? Well, they print treasury bonds, T-bonds, securities, right? Now, what happens if you print more treasury bonds? You increase the supply of bonds. Now, bonds are bought and sold in the open market, right? So if you increase the supply, what happens to the value of those bonds? They fall, right? However, bonds, their return is in a set coupon rate, which means that, basically what a bond is a promissory note. It's an IOU saying, hey, I promise to pay you back double in 10 years, whatever it is, right? That's a definite payback amount, right? But because these bonds are bought and sold in the open market, what is this? Let's say this is a $200 bond. I'm not sure what it is, right? But let's say, right, now it can be bought and sold for $100, for $400, whatever, right? Whatever the market value is, right? But the return rate is always going to be the same. So if the supply is going up, that's driving down the price of these bonds. Now, if the return rates are still high, that means the relative return rate is being driven up, right? So, for example, if this is a $200 bond and in 10 years you get back $400, right? But there's so many of these bonds, right, that the price has fallen to $100, right? So your return now is $300. You see what I'm saying? It's driving up the return rate, right? What does that do? That drives up interest rates. So you put these bonds in the open market. You have these bond issues, and banks and financial institutions and other nations, national banks, other nations, they purchase these bonds. Okay, what do they purchase them with? Well, dollars. Those dollars go back to the Treasury, right? And so this can drive up interest rates. It can drive up interest rates by increasing the return rates here, right, with bonds. And also, in a sense, you're taking money off the market if it's going back to the Treasury, right? That's causing a scarcity of capital. So in any rate, this can raise interest rates by decreasing bond prices, raising yields, reducing money available, and reducing money on the market, right? So if interest rates rise, that's not good for the economy, right? Because interest rates are the cost of getting capital. If the cost of getting capital is too high, well, then your mortgage payments, for example, are too high. Maybe you can't buy a house, or you can't buy the house that you want, right? Maybe you can't buy a new car. Well, that's not good for the economy, right? Think of big ticket items that you purchase with loans, right? That hurts all that. Also think of businesses. Businesses are the major loan, consumers, right? If they want to start a new business or they want to expand their business, well, if interest rates are too high, they can't, right? So it hurts the economy. High interest rates. So if interest rates are high, the Fed responds. The Fed, big function of the Fed is to control the availability of currency, of capital, right? So the Fed has three main tools with which they control interest rates, right? One is the discount rate. Now, the discount rate is the interest rate at which they loan money to member banks of the Federal Reserve System, right? And then those banks loan banks to other banks at the prime lending rate. And then those banks loan money to businesses and people, so forth, at whatever market rate, right? So basically, they control interest rates by controlling the interest which they charge to loan, the Fed loans money, right? And the next thing they can do is change the reserve requirement. The reserve requirement is the amount of money you must keep on hand. And typically that's set pretty locked down at 10%, right? They don't change this very much, right? And the idea is if you reduce that, let's say you reduce it to 5%, well, you just made 5% of the bank's money more available. So you increase the money supply in a sense, right? Which drives down interest rates. All right. The key way the Fed controls interest rate is through open market operations, which they buy and sell securities. So they buy and sell these T-bonds, but then they can also buy mortgage-backed securities, that the toxic securities that brought down the financial markets in 2007, 2008, right? The Fed bought like 3 trillion of these. And then government-sponsored enterprises are these big government agencies like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Tennessee Valley Authority, Farmer Mac, whatever, and they sell their own securities, all right, their own bonds, right? They can buy or sell these bonds, or any other asset they can buy or sell, right? But the idea is this: if they buy these bonds, again, they're increasing demand for these bonds, which is driving up bond price, and that's lowering interest rates. That's lowering the relative return rate, right? Also, to buy these bonds, right, they're dumping money into the market. They're paying with money, so that's increasing the availability of currency, which drives down interest rates. So either way you look at it, right, this process lowers interest rates, or if they can go the other way, sell bonds, and that drives up interest rates. You buy assets with Fed Reserve, so they buy these assets with Federal Reserve deposits, right? Now, how do they get this money? Well, they make this money. The Federal Reserve Bank is the sole organization authorized to make U.S. money. All right. Now, out of all of that I'm saying, right, this is the only thing that's going to be attacked. All right. If you understand none of this, you'll attack all of it. Right? Oh, it's all crazy. No, this is all common sense stuff here. But this, I know this is going to be attacked. All right. What people don't realize is the Federal Reserve Bank is not a government bank. It's a private bank. Right? It's run by government officials, yeah. And, I like most of these guys. Most chairmen of the Federal Reserve Banks. I respect these guys. I think they're pretty intelligent. I think they know what they're doing, right? And they're government officials. They're doing what's best. But the thing about it is, who owns this bank? It's a private bank, right? Now, the Federal Reserve Bank gets to make money. Do you make a lot of money by making money? Oh, hell yeah! It's like presto changeo. You just made money. Right? And every new dollar they make is worth every dollar that you have. Now, what can that do? That can drive down the value of your dollars. By increasing the money supply, that can cause inflation. Prices the value of dollars going down, which means prices are going up. Right? So essentially, who said it? Morgan Freeman. Not Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman. I'm spacing his first name. The famous economist, Freeman. He said basically making money is a form of taxation, right? And really what it is, it's a silent transfer of wealth. So when the Federal Reserve Bank makes new money, right, out of nothing, right, presto changeo, every new dollar it makes has the exact same value as every dollar that you have. Where does that value come from? It comes from your money. So value of your money is being transferred to their new money that they're making. Right? So it's a transfer of wealth. All right? It's tapping in, stealing a little value from your money. Right? Now, another way of explaining this is the idea of seigniorage. Seigniorage is the profits of making money. And, the profits are supposed to go to the Treasury, but you know what? The Federal Reserve Bank, by law, makes 6% of the profits. Right? And it's 6%, for example, of the seigniorage. Now, the example of seigniorage is, let's say this is a $100 bill. And let's say it costs the government 50 cents to make this $100 bill. I'm not sure how much it would really cost, but let's say 50 cents. That means on each $100 bill, the government makes, it's not the government, it's the Federal Reserve Bank, a private bank, makes $99.50 profit, of which they keep 6%, so basically $6, right? All right, so what I say is seigniorage profits go to the Treasury, but can increase money supply, and that can cause inflation, which is a form of silent taxation. Value and wealth being transferred from your money that you have in the bank to their money, right? Right. Now, to stave off inflation, you need the petrodollar. So this is one of the reasons why the petrodollar is important, because it helps boost up demand for dollars, which helps stave off or hedge against inflation. All right? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, out of all this that I said, right, out of all this, I know they're going to focus on this. Oh, that's crazy. That's conspiracy theory. The Federal Reserve Bank is not really a private bank. It's a private bank. All right, so what do I say here? T-bond, all this stuff here. Okay. Anyways, so I guess I'll do. Oh, another thing is, all right. So here's a summary of economic benefits of war. One, you get big profits from military industry. Weapons and munitions are hugely profitable. Right? You get big sale of them. Big profits from no-bid contracts for LOGCAP, private and military security contractors, Reconstruction. All right, and also you have cost-plus contracts. Cost-plus is you get a guaranteed profit on every dollar you spend. All right? What does that do? That encourages some more spending. That encourages fraud, waste, and abuse. All right? So they would get these cost-plus contracts in which no matter what, you're guaranteed a profit on every dollar you spend. Well, then you spend more because you make more money. All right. So then you bust OPEC. All right. You can bust OPEC and regain control over oil price. All right. Control of price is the essence of monopoly power. All right. Oil prices go down. Low oil prices benefit corporations, and more than that, it's a boost to the world economy. It's a big boost to the U.S. economy. You also benefit balance of trade, right, which involves money supply, currency values, interest rates, and trade. You protect the petrodollar, right? And the idea is with that, you stave off inflation, which means you can expand the money supply while avoiding inflation. For example, you get all this big deficit spending, right? What eventually happens, I mean, it's not intended, but this is what happens. It expands the money supply, right? That can cause inflation. The petrodollar helps stave off that inflation, allows you to keep spending. So all that's spent on the war here, right? The petrodollar helps that spending. Big profits from loans to oil exporting nations at war. Big profits from making money through monetizing debt. Plus, the Fed now owns the debt bonds. The Fed has real wealth from the money they made. Right. The Fed gets to make money, and then now they have real wealth from it. All right. So does this look like a racket? Does it look like a shakedown? Does it look like they're shaking the oil tree here? Right? With war, getting more oil, increasing supply, dropping oil prices. I mean, I'll explain a real way this works. A real way involving the Iran-Iraq War. Here's the Iran-Iraq War here. One of the key factors in bringing down oil price. Right? I'll explain that in a second. All right. Now, who's getting shaken? Well, Middle East oil countries and also the taxpayer. Taxpayers who's paying for these, U.S. War efforts. Oil, dollar, users tax. Okay. All right. So oil nations are getting shaken. Dollar. Anyone who owns dollars is getting shaken down here. And then U.S. taxpayers. Right. So is conflict profitable? Yeah, in many ways. So what I want to do is go into a more detailed analysis. All right. Number one. We said that no nation comes close to the USA in spending. Of the top 10 military spending nations, the USA spends more than the next 9 nations combined. Right? Now, the economic utility of war conflict can be traced at least as far back as M. King Herbert's prediction on U.S. peak oil, which occurred in 1970. So, M. King Herbert was a geologist, and he made famous predictions. He kept modifying it, but in all cases, it was 1970, right? He predicted peak oil, and sure enough, it happened. U.S. peak oil production occurred in 1970. This shows it right here. Here, 1970, peak oil production going up. He predicted this, and this is exactly what happened. And then it went down like this, but what happened is, this is Alaskan oil. Alaskan oil kicked in about here, mid to late 70s, right? And that helped prevent the fall, so it's adding some, but it's still falling because Alaskan oil itself is diminishing, right? And then here, this green section is the rise of fracking. It began to rise about 2012 or so, became significant. By 2015 here, it's pretty significant, all right? And we'll talk about this in a second as far as oil prices, all right? So it goes back to this point here, all right? M. King Herbert's prediction of peak oil. Now that's a big problem for the U.S. because our oil supplies are dropping off, right? And I'll explain what that means as far as the ability to control oil price, right? So to start with, I guess I'll start with a review of the importance of oil. Oil is the key raw material resource for industrial economies. Why? Because oil is involved in the economy in multiple ways. One way is every damn thing that's made is transported. Right? You don't consume it where you make it. You transport it some distance, some way, whether it's across town, whether it's across the state, across the nation, whether it's throughout the world. Right? Transportation is huge for commerce. Without that, you're not getting products to market. Without getting products to market, you're not selling. Without selling, you're not producing because you're not making a profit. All right? Without transportation, the economy shuts down. And oil is today the backbone of transportation. Whether it's air, water, or ground transportation, it's oil. Now, another way is oil is the building block for the synthetic chemical industry. And if it's not made of glass, wood, steel, natural fabrics, mineral stones, basic simple stuff, it's made of oil. The vast, only a few things are made of these. Glass windows, glass tables, whatever, wood product. The vast majority of things that we use in our society are made from oil. Why? Because they're made from carbon, and oil is the cheapest source of carbon, readily available for synthetic chemistry. All right? Everything from fertilizers to cosmetics to medicines to plastics to fabrics, anything made from oil. All right. I'll just show you real quick. Let's see here. Here's a short list of products made from this. There's 6,000 products here. This website claims. There's 144 of them. Any pharmaceutical, bicycle tires, dresses, putty, umbrellas, car batteries, cortisone, any medicine, any pharmaceutical, food preservatives, fertilizers, plastics, rubber cement, ice cubes, electric blankets, linings, refrigerants, perfumes, insecticide, everything made from oil. All right. So if oil prices go up, not only do you get whacked with transportation, you get whacked by raw material for manufacturing. All right. All right. So now, oil is the building block for the synthetic chemical industry. If it is not, okay, I said that right. The oil shocks in 1973 and 79 killed the world economy, and I'll explain this in this diagram here in a second. All right, I'll come down to that. Western industrial nations lost virtually all direct control over foreign oil by 1980. Now, I showed how this was done in my lesson on conflict in the Middle East. All right, it's chronological, historical tracing. I can't go over that. I can't teach you this, but again, by 1980, Western nations lost control over foreign oil. It was all developed by a handful of oil companies called the Seven Sisters, primarily the Seven Sisters. All right, seven major oil companies, 5 of which were U.S. One was Dutch Shell, the other one was British Petroleum. All right, but they pretty much developed all the world's overseas oil, initially, and then they lost it all, lost control of it all through nationalization of oil. The world economy is being held hostage by OPEC-controlled oil prices. All right, I'll explain that in a second. A new means of indirectly controlling oil production to control price was needed. So here's a brief history. All right, here's peak oil, 1970. Remember I told you that, right? Here's oil prices, right? Historically, they've been dropping down. This is in 2010 dollars, right? So it's actually falling, right? Here is when the Texas Railroad Commission set pro-rationing at 100% production capacity. What that means is oil companies control, this is a cartel. the oil companies in this cartel, controlled by the Texas Railroad Commission, right, were authorized to produce at 100% production capacity. What that means is our demand is at or exceeding our production capacity. We no longer have any spare production capacity. All right, let's see if I can show you this diagram here. I think I have it. Let's see here. Oh, okay, here. So if this is our production capacity and this is our demand, we have spare production capacity. So if this is how much we're using, this is how much we're making. If we raise it a little bit, right, increase production, that's going to drop price. If we lower production, right, you create a shortage, a scarcity, that raises price, right? So with that, with spare production capacity, you can go up or down, right, and you can control price. But if our demand is at a production capacity, you can no longer control price because we're pumping out as much as we can, right? And then if our demand exceeds production capacity, we're totally screwed. We cannot control price, which is what happened by 1971. We lost control of oil price, right? Does that make sense? Right. So that happened here. Now, what did that mean? Control of oil price, which is the definition of monopoly power, the ability to control price. Because if you have the ability to control price, you have the ability to control profits, to maximize your profits. All right. Now, the ability to control price was lost by the U.S. and it went to whoever had spare production capacity. And who was that? It was OPEC. All right. OPEC had plenty of spare production capacity, especially Saudi Arabia. I mean, not all countries did. For example, like the North African oil-producing countries were, they barely had any spare production capacity. But countries like Saudi Arabia had huge. I mean, back at this time when Saudi Arabia's quota was maybe 2.5 to maybe 3.5 million barrels per day. They had a production capacity nearing 10 million barrels per day. They had way more spare production capacity, right? So now what that meant is they became what are called the monitors of spare production. And that's the people who control oil price. Right? They controlled oil price, which means they had monopoly power over price. And then what happened in 1973, you had the Yom Kippur War start, in which basically the Arab countries were all pissed off about how Israel beat up on them, took the land from them in the 1967 Seven-Day War, right? So this is their payback war, right? They launched the war, and, before you knew it, Israel was almost going under. I mean, literally within a day or so, right? There was a threat that Israel may no longer exist as a nation, right? So the U.S. responded with massive shipments of arms and munitions to Israel. We're going to keep them in the fight. We're going to keep them alive, right? Well, you think the Arab countries like that, all these OPEC nations? No, they got pissed off. So they embargoed oil to the U.S., right? And this is what happened to oil price. Here's oil price, right? Yom Kippur War, bam! Oil price jumps up. Huge jump. Massive jump in oil price. Kills our economy, right? Kills the world economy. Oil price holds the world economy hostage, and we no longer control oil price. Who controls it? OPEC, right? And then after that, oil prices dropped slowly. But then what happened is, in 1979, you had the Iranian Revolution, right? Where the people got all pissed off at the Shah. They overthrew him, right? And they replaced it with a Islamic state, right? A religious government here, led by the Ayatollah, and oil production out of Iran plummeted. What did that do? Bam! Oil price went up. Killed the U.S. economy. Killed the world economy. All right. So then prices, the Iran-Iraq War starts, and the Iran-Iraq War played a big part in lowering oil price. Now, it wasn't the only factor. Another big factor was the fact that oil prices kill the economy. If it kills the economy with a bad economy, well, that kills demand for oil. That lowers price. So it hurts themselves. You know? And no one knows that better than the Saudis. The Saudis try to maintain, a healthy economy because they want to maintain their oil sales. Right? So by raising price too much, well, this came back, and backfired on them. Right? So that's one thing, but a key thing is the efficacy of war in increasing supply of oil, lowering price. And that especially occurred in 1985, right about here. Right? Because what happened was Iran and Iraq are at war, but it wasn't so much Iran and Iraq that really increased production. It was the other Sunni nations supporting Iraq. So Iran is Shia, Iraq is Sunni. Iran is a threat not just to Iraq, but also to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, for example, all of which are Sunni nations that supported Iraq. And what they did is they waged economic warfare against Iran by overproducing way above OPEC quotas, right? So by overproducing, they sold more oil. By selling more oil, well, first of all, they got more revenues, right? They used those revenues to make loans to Iraq, supporting Iraq. So Iraq can fight its war. They're financially supporting Iraq's war. They're financing Iraq's war effort. Of course, they're saying you got to pay us back, right? But then the other key factor was they're driving down oil price. And what is that doing? That's cutting into the revenues of Iran, who has limited production and shipping capacity, especially shipping, which is being attacked by Iraq. All right? So it's cutting into their ability to fight the war. All right? But what happened? Oil prices plummeted. Now, it doesn't show up, but there was a spot price in 1985 of $6 per barrel. It's down here somewhere. Now, a spot price is like a daily fluctuation, right? But it just shows how low prices got, right? It's not the futures market. It's on, the spot price means you buy it right now. It's not bought and sold on the futures market. All right. So Saudi, Kuwaiti overproduction, right? Occurred about here. It dropped oil price. Big drop. Boom. Right? And then this is when the Iran-Iraq war ends. So oil prices, so it shows that war played a big role in getting oil prices down, right? And then this is when the Iran-Iraq war ended, and what happened? Oil prices started to climb again, all right? And then the Gulf War hit, right? And then oil prices dropped through here, right? This big drop was due to from here down was due to the Asian financial crisis, right? The Asian economy's tanking here, right? But through here, now, oil prices are falling here because OPEC was busted. The first Gulf War busted OPEC, all right? And it busted OPEC through divide and conquer of OPEC, all right? What you do is, through war, you bust out a couple of nations with massive debt. Kuwait is all busted up. Kuwait has to rebuild. Kuwait has to now build its military to defend itself, which it didn't have much of, right? So they're making big purchases to reconstruct, right? Remember I said how you make big profits from reconstruction? Well, you pay for that by selling oil, right? So they got big bills to pay, right? They can't cut oil production. They're in massive debt. Saudi Arabia, same thing. They participated in the war, so they had big bills from their own war effort. Plus, they agreed to pay 60% of the U.S. cost of that war. Of the $50 billion of that war, they paid $30 billion. Bush, got them to pay $30 billion. That's another big debt. And then also, the third thing is, Saudi Arabia made huge purchases of weapons after the war. A lot of M1 Abrams, a lot of F-15s, a lot of U.S., and, they bought British stuff too, right? Mostly U.S. weapons. So we made money selling weapons, but also, they were so much in debt, both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia were so much in debt, they couldn't cut oil production, all right? And everyone demanded that Saudi Arabia make the first cuts, and because with the loss of production out of Iraq, all right, Saudi Arabia came back and picked up most of the slack there, right? So they had the biggest gains and increased oil production. So everyone demanded, well, you make the first cuts because you benefited the most from the war. But Saudi Arabia was saying, hey, we got so much that we can't. So the idea was, right, this created dissension within the OPEC, and they could not agree to production reductions, and OPEC was busted. OPEC could not control price. Prices fell. And they fell at a time when they should have been climbing, because right here, at this point right here, right, this is when the Soviet Union fell, right? When the Soviet Union fell, Russian production of oil plummeted to almost half, 11.5 million barrels per day to 6 million barrels. That's cut in half. That's a huge loss of oil on the open market. That should have driven up price big time. Prices should have skyrocketed, all right, with that. But prices fell, right? And also at the same time, the Asian economy was taking off, increasing demand. So the combined effect of loss of supply from the fall of the Soviet Union and combined with the rise of Asian economies, increasing demand for oil, prices should have gone up like this. Maybe not as steep, but the same idea, gone up. This is driven by some demand right here. Low spare capacity. Right? Remember talking about spare capacity? Right? This is low world spare capacity. Right? All right. This should have gone up like this. But no. The Gulf War took it down. So once again, war proved efficacious at lowering oil prices. Right? It busted OPEC. Now, I'm going to get all sorts of liars saying, no, the war didn't do that. You know what? When I did my research, I read every damn article on OPEC from, when was it? Basically 1990 or so to about 2003. Right? Every damn article in the New York Times on OPEC. Right? And during the war, right, during the Gulf War, even before the ground war started in March, right? Let's see, March. When did the ground war start? January. Yeah, about March. February, March. Anyways, even before the ground war started, all the oil experts and economists are saying this is going to bust OPEC. OPEC's going to be flat on its back. OPEC will not be able to control oil price due to this war. Right? This is going to give U.S. power over oil prices. Right? And sure enough, it did. Exactly what they said. All right? Gulf War, OPEC unit destroyed. And then what happened is there was a big drop-off here. Right? This is the Asian financial crisis. I think it started with Thai currency. A big crisis in Thai currency. Spread throughout Asia. Big economic downturn throughout Asia. That cut demand for oil. Oil demand was cut, prices fell, right? And actually, it was this big shock here that drove Saudi Arabia to make its first big cuts in defense spending, first big cuts in its social welfare system support. I mean, the damn country's like a welfare state, right? The Saudi royal family just doles out money to keep everyone happy, right? So they made big cuts, right? And with that, they were able to cut production. Right, so OPEC started to recover here, and then you had growth. This is when the Asian economy is mostly driven by the Asian economies. Asian economy recovery, growth, especially of China and India, right? Growth in the middle class, growth in their purchase of automobiles and consumption of fuels and so forth. So you had shortage of spare production capacity, prices rising here, right? And it wasn't until fracking really kicked in, right? So prices were going way up. And I don't know if you recall, but between like 2012, 13, 14, prices were going up, nearing $4 a gallon of gasoline, all right? Roughly around there, getting there. But then what happened was in 2015, oil prices really went down, right? Gas prices went down. And I remember during the summer of 2015, was it summer 2000? Yeah, roughly summer of 2015, right? Gasoline prices got down to, I bought gasoline like $1.33 a gallon, right? $1.33. Got really cheap. And what happened was fracking started to become significant. And it wasn't so much just the fracking, right? So the fracking is an increased supply. It's helping drive down oil prices. But what happened was the Saudi response to this. The Saudis were threatened by fracking, so they waged economic warfare against the frackers, trying to drive them out of business. And they did so by driving down price below which fracking was profitable, right? So that their marginal returns were lost, and they were driven out of business. So they tried to do that, drive the frackers out of business, right? But it eventually failed, and Saudi Arabia gave up. But all this extra production drove down oil prices. Plus, the China economy, went through a brief recession at about this time, and also Iran production was kicking in. There was the Obama nuclear deal, and allowed Iran to restore production and sale. You lifted the sanctions on them, so Iranian production was also kicking in too. These are factors in the fall of oil price. All right, so now, what I said, going back to this, M. King Hubert's prediction, peak oil 1970, right here. Okay, 1 year later, Texas Railroad Commission sets pro-rationing at 100% production capacity. This meant that the USA essentially did not have any spare production capacity. This meant that the USA was now a net importer of oil, for one thing, right? Far more importantly, the loss of spare production capacity meant that the U.S. lost control of oil price. All right? Remember I said if you have spare production capacity, you have some fudge factor, you can increase production or decrease production to control price. But if you're consuming at or above your production capacity, then you have no way. You have no room to increase it, so you can't control price. Let's see, yeah. All right. Now, the definition of monopoly power is the ability to control price, through which profits are maximized. All right, that's why monopolies are so profitable, is because if you can control price, you can maximize your profits, right? And screw all the consumers. Control of price went to whoever had spare production capacity, and that's called the monitor of spare production. And that was OPEC, because they had plenty of spare production capacity, especially Saudi Arabia. As I told you, they had almost 200% spare production capacity. I mean, literally that much, 200% spare production capacity. That's whopping. This meant OPEC had monopoly power over oil, right? And because oil is the single most important resource for industrial production, commerce, and the synthetic chemical industry, OPEC's monopoly power over oil meant they had a potential stranglehold over the world's economy. They held the world's economy by the balls. All right. So remember that diagram I showed you up here? Well, here's the same diagram, oil price. Right. What I did is I correlated that with inflation and correlated that with economic growth of the U.S. economy. So this is U.S. GDP growth. Here's zero growth, here's positive growth, here's negative growth. This is a falling economy. You never want this, right? This is severe recession. Retraction of our economy, All right. So if you take a look at this, big jump here. Remember I said this is the Yom Kippur War. OPEC embargoes oil to the U.S., right? I'm going to get a swig of something to drink because my throat is sore. Hold on for a second. All right. All right, so look at inflation. Look at the correlation here. Look at how important oil is. Boom, oil prices go up. Inflation, bam. Oil prices fall. Inflation drops, right? Oil prices climb, bam. Inflation, bam. Oil prices fall. Inflation falls, right? Oil prices climb again, bam, right? So it's like, I mean, you look at that, this is almost parallel. This is a super strong correlation. All right, now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, correlation is not causation. I mean, it's pretty strong evidence of it, though. I mean, damn strong. I mean, you could have, intervening factors, all sorts of intervening factors. Okay. Now, and then look at the economy. Whenever you have inflation, bam, strong negative correlation. High inflation, bam. Inflation going up, bam, economy goes down. Right? So, oil, we said, is huge because everything involves oil. Whether it's transportation, whether it's through refrigeration, whether it's through synthesis of the products themselves. So you got to make the products from oil, then you got to transport the products. You get a double whammy, double impact of oil. All right? Oil is huge. I mean, I have statements by, for example, the Secretary of Interior during the Roosevelt administration, Icky, saying, hey, industrial development was founded on the backbone of oil. Anyways, and then in 1973, OPEC exercised that power, that monopoly power, and embargo oil, all right, which caused oil prices to quadruple, creating massive inflation, which killed the U.S. economy. I just showed you that. Oil prices, inflation, kills the economy. Oil prices go up, inflation goes up, kills the economy. Now, one Nixon response to the oil crisis was the establishment of the Petrodollar. I bet you there's going to be some economists saying, oh, it's not that simple as I mean, there's other factors, yeah, for sure, right? This is a dominant factor. One Nixon response to the oil crisis was establishment of the petrodollar. So the petrodollar was created by Nixon. First with Saudi Arabia, and then that was applied to all OPEC nations, right? And what the petrodollar is the agreement that OPEC nations, and now it's pretty much world, the primary currency for selling, buying and selling oil is the dollar. That's a petrodollar throughout the world. All right. First established with Saudi Arabia, then with other OPEC nations, right, in which they agreed only to sell oil for dollars. Dollars only, nothing else. And what this does is this boosts dollar demand, which serves as a hedge against inflation. Remember the big inflationary pressures here? Inflation, right? This is double-digit inflation. What does that mean? That means interest rates are above this. High interest rates. All right? That means prices are going up. People can't buy things. That means wealth is going down. Your wealth in the bank, your wealth in stocks and securities, it's all going down. Right? Because the value of your money is going down. This is killing the economy. People can't buy things. Interest rates are too high. People can't buy things. And how does the Fed combat high interest rates? Or how does the Fed combat inflation, high inflation? By raising interest rates. Right? All right. Okay. So the petrodollar was a way of boosting demand for dollars. If you sell oil only for dollars, that increases the demand for dollars. People got to get dollars to buy oil. So you increase the demand for dollars. That's a hedge against inflation, right? Which is falling dollar values. Now, it was also intended to facilitate the recycling of currency to help with the balance of trade. So, this whole idea that oil prices jumped way up. Now, what that means is many more dollars are flowing to oil-producing nations, all right? And what's happening is the dollar supplies there are going way up, right? With nowhere to go. If they're not buying U.S. goods in return, those dollars are building up. What does that mean? The value of dollars over in that market now is falling. It's getting worthless for those people. So what does that do to the exchange rate with, let's say, Saudi Arabia, I believe, right? The Saudi currency. What does that do to the rial, right? It raises its value. It raises the exchange rate of the, and what does that do to prices? It raises prices, right? You know, and another way of looking at it is, given the fact that oil is bought and sold with dollars, if dollar value falls with inflation, that means oil prices are going up, right? Which is inflationary. All right. So, all right. So the idea was you recycle currency. That currency. The idea was, okay, if all these dollars are being, you get these OPEC nations to reinvest in the United States, and they're recycling currency in investments, buying U.S. securities, buying real estate, whatever, buying stocks in defense industry companies. That's what a lot of the Saudis do, right? Right? Oil and war, right? And this is the same thing China's doing today, right? They're recycling currency. Now, back then it was a good thing. We need this money, right? If we don't have this money in the United States, that causes a shortage of capital. What does that do? If you have scarcity of capital, that drives up interest rates. That's not good. So this recycles currency back to the United States. Now, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution occurred, and the loss of Iran export caused oil prices to triple, again killing the economy with massive inflation. And at that time, it was called stagflation. Right? I remember clearly as a kid the term stagflation, and what that meant is, normally inflation occurs when you have a booming economy. When the economy is going great, just all gangbusters, right? What happens is people have a lot of money. There's a lot of demand. There's a lot of demand for goods and resources, and that causes scarcity of those resources with that high demand. That causes prices to go up. That causes inflation. Now this is the worst of both worlds, because you have a stagnant economy or even a falling economy, recessionary economy, but you got inflation anyways. That's a double whammy. And that inflation is not caused by, the economy booming, but rather by an external source, an external resource, which is oil. Oil prices going up. The big driver of that inflation. Big driver of prices going up. All right? A big external source of that inflation was oil. Now, shortly after this, the Iran-Iraq War started. All right, so Iran-Iraq War. Here's the Iran Revolution. Right after this, Iran-Iraq War started. All right. Let's see where. Yeah, in which the USA supplied weapons and intelligence to both sides. So our ally back then, right? Believe it or not, was Saddam Hussein. Right? He's our ally. We're supporting him with weapons, with intelligence, right? Including AWACS aircraft leased through that we had leased through Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia supplied AWACS intelligence to Iraq. U.S. authorized, right? And we're feeding them satellite intelligence too. And we're also doing the same to Iran. We're supplying them with weapons indirectly through Israel. And then we supplied them with intelligence, just like Iraq. We supplied Iran with intelligence. And then in 1984, 85 or so, 85 I know definitely, when were Iran-Contra sales? I think they started 84. There was a whole bunch of sales, right? The Reagan administration started direct supply of weapons to Iran, directly from the Reagan administration, right? That's what Iran-Contra was partially all about. Really, it was about oil sales, oil prices. We're fueling this war, so we're fueling both sides of the war. Now, this war proved the efficacy of war in the Middle East in terms of driving down oil prices. And like I said, in 1985, a spot price fell to $6 a barrel. I mean, that's a daily price, it's a fluctuation, but still, it just shows how low prices got. Right? And this is $20 a barrel, right? It got way down here. Well, that's a spot price, right? But it showed prices came down. The war played a big role in getting prices down. Now, war is a do or die. Remember how I told you how it happened? It was largely through Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates waging economic warfare against Iran. Right? Driving down price, but also getting revenues to finance Iraq's war effort. Right? Alright, so war is a do-or-die situation that requires maximum effort. And so munitions and weapons are expended at a high rate. This means weapons and munitions have to be purchased at a high rate. And the USA is by far, in a way, the biggest supplier of weapons throughout the Middle East. Now, I want to show you that with a map to make it simple. Alright, I did the research on the arms, weapons possessed by these nations, all these Middle East nations, and by far and away the biggest supplier of weapons throughout the Middle East is not Russia, not the old Soviet Union, it's USA. We're fueling weapons all everywhere. Right? So, to explain this map, I want to first say that if you see these red underlined, what this means is these nations used to be client states of the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union. They bought the weapons from the Soviet Union, primarily. I mean, like Iraq. Iraq bought some French stuff, right? Iraq got stuff from the U.S. We sold them chemical weapon stuff. We sold them biological weapon stuff. Anyways, but they bought most of the stuff from the Soviet Union. Lebanon, Jordan, Kuwait, Egypt, Libya. All these nations, I mean, you could say roughly half of the Middle East nations, roughly half, were Soviet client states. Now, the only client state Russia has remaining is Syria. And Syria is not really a whole nation. You could say that the Syrian government possesses only about a third of Syrian territory now. Right? A chunk about right here. All the rest is broken away, right? These other factions. Alright, so red box means a current Russian state. So, almost all Soviet, Russian, but with the current conflict, many nations are fueling war with weapons. So, who's fueling weapons here? Well, Russia still is, but so are we, at least to a lesser degree with small arms, but Iran is, right? Turkey is, Saudi Arabia, Qatar is. I mean, this is the new battle lines here. Sunni, Shia. Wars are being fought, proxy war in Syria. Alright? Who else is supplying weapons? I know Qatar's big. Saudi Arabia, let me think. Who else? Iran, Turkey. Where else? Turkey. Turkey's up here. Russia. Okay. U.S. a little bit. Alright. So the blue boxes mean nations that U.S. sells weapons. And let's take a look at these. Okay. So where does Iraq get his weapons? The vast majority is USA. I mean, you can say, the vast majority of weapons they purchase today are USA. Right? Lebanon, mostly USA. I mean, who would think Lebanon? I mean, you think Lebanon is being, whatever, right? Jordan, almost all USA. Israel is huge. Not just missiles, not just Air Force, ground force stuff too. And I say here roughly equal because Israel's Navy is almost all Israel. All right? Almost exclusively Israel. But still the biggest thing is the Air Force, right? And that's the biggest as far as financially, right? And that's almost all USA. They still have some of the old Neshers, which are basically Israeli stolen version of the French Mirage 5. Kafirs, they also built Kafirs too. Those are old planes. All the brand new Israeli planes are USA these days. F-35, F-15, F-16. Neschers and Kafirs are old planes. That's 1970s stuff. Mostly USA, Egypt, mostly USA, but the Air Force and Navy is mixed. You know, there's US stuff here, but it's mixed. Other nations. Saudi Arabia, Army is dominated by USA. Air Force is mostly USA, and then the Navy is mixed. They get their Navy from other nations. Yemen. Now this is the civil war going on there. U.S. and Iran. This is largely a proxy war between USA, Iran, Saudi Arabia, right? I'm not sure if Qatar, United Arab Emirates are involved, or Qatar, or Kuwait, right? I know Saudi Arabia is heavily involved in this. Oman, mostly USA and Britain. You could say roughly split 50-50 here, USA, Britain, Oman. Qatar, they get their stuff, you know, roughly, I mean, it's all rough, roughly equally French, USA, Great Britain, Germany, Turkey, Italy. They get their stuff from everywhere. Kuwait, mostly USA. All right, that pretty much covers it. Now, Iran gets most of its stuff from its own indigenous arms industry, right? Which is, you know, by and large kind of crappy, right? Especially with a very high-tech stuff like aircraft fighters and so forth. They can make decent drones, which are low-cost, effective means of like swarm attacks, and they've been whacking some, you know, Saudi oil facilities lately with them, as a means of leverage against the U.S. You know, driving up oil prices in the world market, right? That could be a problem. All right, and they still buy. They bought Russian S-400s. They don't buy much though. They bought some French stuff, bought some UK stuff, British stuff, right? They don't buy much foreign stuff. They bought, I remember during the 1980s, they bought Chinese Silkworm missiles, all right, a few of them. They don't buy much. They don't have much money to buy it with, right? Most of their stuff comes from their indigenous arms industry. And most of the weapons, though, are still U.S. weapons, whether it's M60 battle tanks, whether it's F-15s, F-4s, all right? Most of the major weapon systems are still USA old stuff that we sold to them way back when the Shah was in power, right? And you know, reason for doing it, Nixon administration. I read congressional hearings by Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Commerce, Nixon administration saying, "Hey, we got to sell these weapons to Iran for the balance of trade." Right? That was big sales of weapons to sustain the balance of trade back then. Libya is a mess now. Libya used to be a Soviet client state now. Libya, you know, there's all sorts of factions in Libya now. Warlords, right? Two main opposition factions, right? And they're getting weapons from United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Russia, Turkey, Germany, for example. All right. U.S. is not directly supplying weapons, but you know, some of these countries are supplying, you know, selling them or providing them U.S. weapons, like UAE especially. All right, so what am I doing here? Iran is a special case, Libya. Iran is a special case because while it makes most of its own weapons, the majority of its major weapon systems are still old USA, purchased by the Shah back in the 70s. Iran makes small purchases of Russian, French, British weapons, but not much really. Libya is a special case because it is a failed state being fed by weapons by many nations. All right, a lot of nations are feeding weapons into there. Syria is a special case because it is a failed state in which many nations are providing weapons again, including USA, while Russia is trying to hang on to its last remaining client state in the Middle East, and their only naval base in the Mediterranean at Tartus. So the only client state Russia has left here in the Middle East is really Syria. And it's super strategic because Russia's only naval base in the Mediterranean is right here, right about here at Tartus. It's a port town there. Russia has a naval base there, right? They got to hang on to that. Out of all the old Soviet client states, all but Syria have been flipped to the United States. Remember all these old Soviet client states? All but Syria. Flipped to the United States. Remember I said flipping client states is profitable? Why? Because you get to sell weapons. Where is it? All right, flipping client states. One of the ways you make money. All right? So don't tell me, that's crazy, that don't happen. Unbelievable. You know, people are going to throw out blanket attacks. Baseless blanket attacks. It's all crap. What is? Everything he says. What did he say? Oh, you know everything. Right? We're flipping client states in the Middle East. We just flipped Iraq. Middle East oil-producing countries do not have sophisticated technologies and industries to make modern weapons, so they have to purchase them. So these countries, they make oil, they produce oil, but they don't have the technology to make their own weapons. All this stuff they buy from advanced technology nations, right? Like the U.S., like European nations, like Russia, like China, right? So to purchase weapons and munitions, Middle East oil-producing countries either have to sell more oil or take out loans, and then they service those loans with interest by selling oil, and then they eventually have to pay back those loans by selling oil. So one way or another, it comes back to selling oil to buy those weapons, right? One way or another, you got to sell oil. Now, in this way, war involving Middle East oil-producing nations, by increasing demand for weapons, by increasing consumption of weapons, increases oil supply on the open market. But not all is in a common sense way you'd expect. For example, in the Iran-Iraq War, right, oil overproduction was conducted by non-warring Sunni nations in support of Sunni Iraq. For example, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE. So here we go. Here is Iraq. It's at war with Iran. They're fighting each other. Well, Iran is Shia. Iraq is Sunni. The Shia threat, all these nations here are Sunni. Only Syria, you could say, is somewhat is Shia related because they're Alawite, which is a branch of Shia. Right? All these nations, you know, Bahrain here, I believe has a majority Shia population, but it's ruled by Sunni. But all these pretty much are Sunni controlled, right? All right, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, right? They're all Sunni. So what they did is they drove excess oil production, driving down price, making more revenue to provide loans to Iraq, helping Iraq fight Iran. At the same time, you're driving down oil price, which is undercutting revenues to Iran, right, hurting them. So basically, they're waging economic warfare against Iran. But it's driving down world oil price, which is what? It's good for the major oil companies, which are more focused on downstream, as we'll see in a second, and the overall economy, U.S. economy, world economy. Good for that. For example, in the Iran-Iraq War, oil overproduction was conducted by non-warring Sunni nations in support of Sunni Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE. They supported Sunni Iraq to defend against Shia by 1. Increasing oil sales to increase revenues to provide loans to Iraq. More oil sales, more money, make loans to Iraq, thus financing Iraq's war effort. And at the same time, driving down oil prices, which meant waging economic warfare, undercutting Iran's ability to get revenues to pay for its war. All right. Thus, war in the Middle East necessitated increased oil supply, right? And it had 3 key effects. It caused oil prices to fall, which was a boon for the U.S. economy and to the major oil companies. It restored control of oil price back in the hands of the USA, indirectly through the creation of conflict and war in the Middle East. Now, I proved historically that the USA has continuously created conflict and war in the Middle East. I showed you how this is done. I can't go back and teach it all. It's far too much information. I know people don't retain jack, but I know the more masses will attack this because they have zero knowledge of this in their brain. So they'll say, That'd be unbelievable, because USA only do good in the world. Yeah. U.S. control of oil price was lost in 1970. Remember I told you that? Peak oil production. Well, 1971, you could say we had no spare production capacity, so we lost control of price. I mean, this killed the economy between 73 to early 80s. Through this means, we regained control of our economic fortunes, our economic destinies. This is not to neglect other demand side means of controlling price. You know, a key demand side was oil prices killed the economy. And when the economy was killed, it killed demand for oil, which caused oil prices to fall, right? Which causes a backfire to OPEC. All right. I hope you understand that. But there's other things like increased efficiency, switching to alternative fuels, right? Conservation methods, right? But a key thing was war, right? It could serve to bust OPEC, like the first Gulf War destroyed OPEC for nearly a decade. 9 years, OPEC was flat on his back through divide and conquer by cutting out, creating within Kuwait and Saudi Arabia extraordinary debt, which prohibited them from making production cuts, essentially breaking OPEC unity and thus blocking production reduction agreements to control price. They couldn't agree on production restrictions. They couldn't control price. For 9 years, OPEC was flat on its back. Oil prices fell. Remember I said oil prices fell like this? This is a time when oil prices should have been soaring. Right? Here, with the fall of the Soviet Union, right here. Rise of Asian economies. Oil prices should have soared, but it fell. Largely due to OPEC being in disarray. So wars proved effective at controlling oil prices. Oil prices being a key factor in our economy. All right. Now I showed you with the chart. You know, I know people are going to say, "Oh, I don't believe that." What are you going to do? You know, here, look. It's like a perfect correlation. This is almost exact correlation. Come on. All right. So it could bust OPEC. So for 9 years, OPEC was flat on its back in disarray, unable to control price, and prices fell at a time when they soaring due to in half, while Asian economies grew. All right. Now, low oil prices mean big profits for the major oil companies, and here is a bit of historical background. All right, I'll show you why. So the world's oil reserves had been mostly developed by a handful of oil companies, you know, starting in the 19th century. For example, I'll give you one example. The Romanian oil fields at Ploesti, all right, a big strategic target during the Second World War. You know, a lot of U.S. bombing raids on Ploesti. It was a German source of oil, all right. Who developed that? Standard Oil. Back in like the 1880s or 90s, 1890s, I believe, developed Ploesti oil. Right, so that's the idea. The big oil companies like Standard, right, developed oil reserves around the world. British Petroleum developing Iran, for example, in what, like 1908, 1909. You know, first discovering it, then developing it. Right. So it was a big oil company. Dutch Shell developing all the oil in the Dutch East Indies. Okay. All right. So what happened then in World War II? World War II set off a period of decolonization, the decolonization era. So prior to this, the world was carved up between the First World and Third World. The Third World were pretty much all colonies of the First World. They were conquered and colonized by Western nations, okay, which became the primary hot battlefield in the First Cold War. So the First Cold War, people think of that as being the U.S. versus Soviet Union, right? Well, that was a Cold War, mostly a standoff, right? Nuclear standoff. The real hot wars were fought in these colonial areas for decolonization, which meant for independence from colonial control, right? This Cold War, capitalist, communist stuff was largely, really about independence. And then what happened is World War II set off the decolonization era by preoccupying the traditional colonial powers like Britain, France, Japan, Netherlands, and a life and death struggle which allowed a modicum of independence for the colonies, right? So the cat's away, the mice will play. It also eliminated Japan as a colonial power, so Japan was totally eliminated as a colonial power, and it weakened all other colonial powers. For example, France, Great Britain were weakened, especially France, right? The two big colonial nations were France and Great Britain, and there were also lesser colonial powers still, like Netherlands, Belgium, Portugal. All these were weakened, especially Netherlands and Belgium, who were conquered by and occupied by, Nazi Germany, were weakened by the war, and thus they were vulnerable to independence moves by their colonies. Key examples were Vietnam, India going in. India was granted independence. They're going, and Britain couldn't stop those, right? Algeria, right? Early examples, and then they're followed by independence moves all throughout Africa and the Middle East. All right, it's a spread. Now, any attempt at independence or nationalization of resources had to be aggressively countered, because successful independence or nationalization anywhere would set off a firestorm of copycat nations that would ignite a jailbreak too big to stop. For example, the idea is this. The first test case was Vietnam. Vietnam right away tried to go independent, right after World War II, right? Well, who moved in? Right? The French, with British help, moved in right away and blocked. They reimposed colonial control of Vietnam, right? And this resulted in the French Indochina War, right? Why did they do that? Because if they just let Vietnam go independent, then all of their colonies throughout the world would say, hey, they did it, why not us? You had to forcefully oppose that, otherwise they'd all try to go independent, right? And then you get a firestorm, a jailbreak that's too big to stop. It's kind of akin to during the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon invaded Spain to start the Peninsula War in 1808. By 1810, all the Spanish colonies in the Americas, from Mexico down to Argentina, everything in the middle, right, through Central America, through all South America, they all went independent. Okay, they all claimed independence. It was a jailbreak, too big for Spain to stop. So the idea is you got to nip it in the bud right away. The first one that tries to go, you got to aggressively attack that. Don't let them break away. The key economic effect of decolonization was loss of Western control of resources and markets, mostly through nationalization. So the people of the nation say, hey, you've been controlling our key resource for all these, decades, if not centuries. We're taking back our control of our own resource, whether it's oil, agriculture, minerals, etc. Right? Now, first key test case, as far as oil, was in 1951. Iran nationalized its oil under Mossadegh. He was a prime minister, but their parliament really voted for that. So this had to be countered. You can't let that example just stand. So in 1953, the CIA and MI6 conducted a coup in Iran, taking down the Iranian democracy and installing a dictator, the Shah, right? Who then went on to buy a lot of U.S. weapons, helping our balance of trade. In large part, the CIA coup was an effort to nip in the bud nationalization to prevent an unstoppable wave of copycat nations throughout the world of any resource, not just oil. You know, it could be any mineral. It could be agriculture, anything. Any resource under colonial or neo-colonial control by a Western nation. This is the same reasoning behind the early efforts to prevent independence nationalization in Vietnam, Algeria, Suez Crisis. Remember I talked to you about the Suez Crisis, how you got to nip that in the bud, how the French and British, invaded and occupied the Suez Canal when Egypt nationalized it. Right, and Putin made the same move. Hopefully you remember that. Regardless, by 1960s, the wave of nationalization of oil was well underway, largely driven by the emergence of small independent oil companies. Right, so they're undercutting the power of the seven sisters. Remember the seven big oil companies? Well, you had the rise of these small independent companies who had the technical expertise, right, who would contract out with the local nation to run their oil production. So the local nation, let's say it's Libya, they didn't have the capacity to run their own oil production, right? They want to nationalize their oil, right, but they can't do it themselves, so they would contract a small company, right, and thus undercut the power of the major oil companies. Right, so now that allowed for nationalization, that there was some means, technical means of running the oil production without the seven sisters big oil companies. Right, so that's why they regained control of the oil, largely through the help of these small independent oil companies. By 1980, with the Saudi 100% purchase of Aramco, their main oil company, pretty much all foreign oil production was out of control of major Western oil companies. So Saudis had 100% control of their oil again, with 100% purchase of Aramco in 1980, right? And that was like the final, I guess I'll try to show you this diagram here. All right, so this is chronological. Whenever you see red, that means some nation nationalized its oil. First was Soviet Union, then it was, this is Mexico, right? Mozambique in 51, right? All these nations, Cuba, Indonesia, Burma, blah, blah. You see this wave of nationalization, all this red, right? And then finally 1980. So the big wave was in the 60s, right? And then through the 70s, and then by 1980, Saudi Arabia, pretty much all foreign oil was out of direct control. Foreign oil production was out of control of the Western corporations, right? Because it was all nationalized. Does that make sense? All right. Regardless, by 1960s, the wave of nationalization of oil was well underway, largely driven by. Oh, I read that already. Okay. So this caused the major oil companies to shift their oil operations away from foreign oil production to transportation, storage, refinement, distribution, and sale of oil products. Whether it's oil, whether it's gasoline, whether it's heating oil, whether it's some synthetic product, with this downstream emphasis, cheaper oil prices meant greater profits. So they're no longer the main production operators, right? They're more focused on downstream. And cheap oil prices at the production point means greater profits for them. Does that make sense? Caveat. About a decade after the Iraq invasion, U.S. fracking became a significant producer and benefits from high oil prices. So, fracking benefits from high oil prices, right? But again, the big oil companies generally do not conduct fracking, but rather lease out land or contract out to smaller specialized fracking companies. That's from Investopedia, who I trust. I like Investopedia. It's a pretty good, solid information source. Okay. So they're saying the big oil companies, are not the big frackers. Fracking, is largely done by these smaller independent companies. All right. But more than that, in the big picture, cheaper oil prices represent a hedge against inflation and a reduction in a ubiquitous input cost. Ubiquitous means it's across the board. Everything uses transportation. Almost everything is made from oil through synthetic chemistry because of the utility of carbon. right? Being the most universal element, largely due to its electronegativity being 2.5, right down the middle, right? Which, and it turns out that in that range, pretty much anything that bonds to carbon will bond with a covalent bond, which means it's going to form a molecule, a distinct particle, which with you can have distinct properties. Not a mineral like a salt, right? Which has very limited basic, properties. That's why all organic life is based upon carbon, because carbon is the most universal element. Increased weapons consumption. All right, so you make money off of increased weapons consumption. Let's see here. Go back to our diagram. Right here. Large weapons purchases means large weapons purchases, sales, which means big profits. All right. So I want to kind of explain to you why weapons sales are so profitable. So first of all, war creates high rates of consumption of super high priced commodities, weapons. Comparison example. So here's a home, right? The price of it's going to depend a lot upon the market, quality of the home and so forth. But let's say, it's $260,000. That's the same price as one of these artillery shells. So this whole house costs the same price as one of these. Okay, I mean $260,000 is reasonable depending upon the market, right? Now the thing about a home is when you make this home is there, for a long time. This lasts. This is a product that lasts for. It's consumed over a long period of time, right? Let's say 100 years, maybe over 100 years. There's a lot of homes that are over 100 years old, right? Now, an artillery shell, during time of war, they don't last very long, especially when they're phased out by next generation weapons, all right? I mean, next generation could be 10 or 20 years, right? Just being phased out then. That's essentially the same as consumption. But if there's a war, they're consumed at a rapid rate. They're popping these off like popcorn in your microwave. Pop, 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 pop. Right? Right? So their consumption rate is high, and they're short-lived. Right? What does that mean? That means a lot of sales. That means a lot of profits. All right? Let's see here. So, example. A home costs about the same as a 6-inch artillery shell, but the home can last for 100 years or more, while the artillery shells are consumed at a high rapid rate during war. The demand for most commodities are relatively stable, So here's a home. Demand is going to go up and down, right? What are some factors that affect demand for homes? Well, the key factors are interest rates. If mortgage rates go down, it increases demand for homes, right? Consumer confidence is a factor, right, which goes along with quality of the economy, more jobs available, unemployment rate, whatever rate, unemployment rate's down, maybe demand goes up, right? Economy takes a downturn, well, maybe demand goes down, right? But it's not fluctuating radically, right? It's pretty steady. Now, for weapons, that's not true. So let's say this is peacetime. During peacetime, you're always firing off weapons for practice, right? So forth. So you have some consumption, some demand, but then if you get a wartime, you get a rapid, immediate jump. I mean, literally overnight. In one, boom, major increase in one day, right? Major increase in demand. Big jump, all right? So wars are very effective at major jumps in demand for weapons. If you can control a war, you can control major jumps in demand for weapons. You see that? It's just common sense, right? Don't tell me, well, the economist said this. Oh, bullshit, right? This is just basic common sense. Start a war, you get a major jump in demand for weapons. The fact that military-grade weapons and munitions are a restricted commodity reduces competition. which allows for higher profit margins. All right, for example, right? It's like illegal drugs. Illegal drugs, because they're illegal, it restricts supply, right? And it drives up price by people who are willing to take the risk. All these illegal cartels and whatever, mafia or whoever's involved in drug, increase profit margins, right? So the same kind of applies to what? It's a restricted commodity. You can't go buy a 6-inch shell at Walmart. You can't go buy a nuclear weapon at Walmart. You can't go buy an aircraft carrier at Walmart or whatever, They're highly restricted commodities. They're highly specialized, high-tech requirements, right, for weapons and munitions decreases competition. For example, you cannot buy a nuclear bomb off the shelf at Walmart. All right, I said that right. But this undermines the quality price discipline enforced by the free market because it's a restricted market and makes weapons procurement more socialistic, government-driven, and thus more prone to favoritism, cronyism, and corruption, right? A big area is going to be nuclear weapons, right? I mean, I know Bechtel, for example, is a big manufacturer of nuclear weapons, right? Bechtel is a favored company, right? It's a private company. It's not sold on the New York Stock Exchange. It's privately owned. They're going to make huge profits off of this new nuclear arms race with Russia, which the U.S. is manufacturing, by the way, driving this bogus Cold War. Both the extreme rigors of combat and the fact that lives are at stake in combat, which necessitates that military equipment be a much higher quality. You don't want to have shoddy crap, our soldiers dying because their stuff breaks down, right? Plus, combat is a very rigorous situation. You got to give extra high quality stuff. So, that requires much higher quality than the typical commercial products. And this forms a highly specialized niche market that reduces competition, right? So another thing, these are all reasons why prices for weapons are extremely high. So another thing is military-grade technologies are not off the shelf and usually have to be developed, often after the contract is awarded, which reduces competition and can lead to big cost overruns. I mean, there's many examples of this. There's initial competition, let's say between, Martin Marietta or Raytheon. I think Raytheon is the one who won the contract for the AIM-120 air-to-air missile. It was the first small diameter fire and forget. I mean, the Phoenix missile was a fire and forget. That was a very large diameter, like a big telephone pole. But this is the size of a Sparrow missile, and it was fire and forget, which means it had its own active homing radar, and the technologies didn't exist. But Raytheon got the contract. I believe it was Raytheon, right? And the technology still didn't exist. So they're trying to develop it, and often what happens is it runs into big cost overruns, right? They got to keep demanding. The contract has already been rewarded, so they have a monopoly, and you keep paying more money is being poured out into this. For example, the F-35. There's been a lot of cost overruns involved in that. They won the contract against Boeing. Boeing had a stealth plane. What was that? F-36 or something like that. Anyways, so Lockheed won the F-35, right? And even after they won the contract, there's developmental problems, big cost overruns. All right, the need for standardization and interchangeability. Now this was recognized way back in the 1830s, and this is when basically the American system of mass production was developed, which originated out of the arms industry and a need for interchangeability of parts, to make weapons production cheaper, and replacement parts cheaper, standardization, interchangeability. combined with modes of weapons procurement, decreases competition. For example, when you buy a weapon, you don't want to buy 30 different types of weapons, right? Because then you get a nightmare trying to maintain all these weapons, right? It's better to buy one, right? It decreases logistical requirements to get repair parts. You kind of know what I mean. For example, standardization and interchangeability of parts decreases manufacturing and repair costs, right? It also reduces logistical support problems. You know, a part breaks down on a rifle, right? You know, if it's interchangeable, well, you don't have to replace the whole rifle. You just replace the part, right? And it's cheaper. Instead of buying many different types of aircraft, you buy just one, right? It makes it cheaper to maintain those aircraft, right? You don't have a nightmare trying to get, you know, countless different types of parts for countless. That's one of the problems with the Russian military, right? They have so many different, you know, boutique little versions of, you know, aircraft that it's a nightmare trying to keep them flying in the air, trying to get parts for them. Same with their trucks, right? Their vehicles, there's so many different versions. It's a nightmare trying to keep them all running. That's one of the reasons why they have a big military weakness. It's one of many reasons. In regards to reduced competition, competition generally only exists during the bidding process when companies develop their weapons and they showcase them, and there's like a fly-off or competition between them. You know, in some way, based on some criteria, they're competing, right? Big examples now, recent examples is, you know, F-35, you know, F-22 versus F-23, for example, competition. The current competition for the new Army rifle. Sig Sauer's got a model, General Dynamics has a model, Textron has a model, and they compete. Now, once the contract is awarded to one company, because you don't want to have your soldiers using all sorts of different rifles, that just creates a mess, a nightmare, right? You want to have one standard unified rifle for your soldiers, right? Because for example, each of these fires different ammunitions, right? I know General Dynamics, I believe, has some weird plastic cased ammunition instead of like a metal cased ammunition. Now, once a contract is awarded, that company essentially has a monopoly, right? And let's see here. So, and compete with other companies to win government contract. But once a contract has been awarded, that company has a monopoly on weapons production. Except, like, for example, during a major war like World War II, when the president utilizes war production authority, or when other companies are contracted to make another company's weapons under license. For example, I believe the biggest producers of the B-24s were not the consolidated companies who designed it, but I believe the biggest producer of B-24s was a Willow Run plant by Ford Motor Company in Detroit. They produced B-24s. They were pumping out B-24s. One B-24 in less than an hour. Less than 60 minutes, a new B-24 pumped out. Right? So that's the idea. But normally, you know, except in extreme cases like that, you know, once that contract is awarded, that company has a monopoly. And that adds the price. After the contract is awarded, continued development problems and cost overruns are typical. I explained that already. Now, these 7 factors above here all contribute to super high costs for weapons, high prices for weapons, which increases profit margins, which makes weapons production profitable. All right, so there's other factors too. For example, nuclear weapons, man. This is a very poor market, no competition. Profit margins can be outrageous here, all right? And then you got other factors. For example, these are F-16 fighter planes. We started buying these in the 1970s. And when we bought them, we paid, in 1998, we paid $14.6 million per plane, right? After we invaded Iraq, shortly thereafter, you know, 2003, 5 years later, we invaded Iraq, and then they started buying U.S. weapons. We flipped them from Russia to U.S., and they made a purchase of, I believe it was about a dozen F-16s. They bought them at $167 million per plane. Now, to be fair, that includes the plane itself, a training program for the pilots, and maintenance and support contracts, right? So they're going to maintain the aircraft too, right? But look at it. That's over 10 times more per plane, right? They're selling in this contract for, all right? So they're high cost, $35 million per helicopter here, all right? I believe an F-22 is like $200 million per plane when we purchase them. We don't purchase F-22s anymore. They're not being made anymore. All right, so weapons are very high cost, which means high profit margins. And then when you have direct involvement in U.S. forces, for example, when we invaded Iraq, right, that's U.S. soldiers on the ground. That's U.S. soldiers fighting a war, insurgency. That's a lot of U.S. weapons being consumed at a very high rate. Now, a war between Middle East nations can destabilize a region, causing other non-warring nations to increase their weapons purchases, to increase their security. For example, Saudi Arabia made big purchases after the first Gulf War, in which Iraq invaded Kuwait. So, Iraq never invaded Saudi Arabia, right? But the whole thing threatened Saudi Arabia, you know. And Saudi Arabia made huge weapons purchases after the first Gulf War. All right? A lot of U.S. weapons, a lot of F-15s, a lot of M1 Abrams tanks, right? And if you look at this again, right, it used to be roughly evenly divided between Soviet client states. Oh, Yemen down here, yeah, is Soviet, right? And then Western client states. Now it's almost all Western, dominated by USA. USA is the biggest arms supplier to the Middle East. USA is the biggest arms proliferator to the Middle East. Now you're going to get economists saying, no, it's not true. No, I did the research on this. Right? So, war creates a lot of destruction. You're going to get economists saying, no, that's not true. Wars don't cause this. I mean, come on. And whenever you get a large amount of destruction, you need to have reconstruction, which makes a lot of money. For example, during the first Gulf War, Kuwait was busted up bad, and all Kuwait reconstruction contracts were monopolized by only 3 connected favored companies: Halliburton, KBR. KBR is a subsidiary of Halliburton now, and Bechtel. Right? Bechtel is a private company. Not publicly owned. It's all private. It means all profits go to private. Only a select group of private people. Second Gulf War. Halliburton got a no-bid contract for the reconstruction of Iraq's oil infrastructure, awarded by the U.S.-controlled CPA, that's the Coalition Provisional Authority, run by Paul Bremer, USA. This is a U.S. Basically, what this was temporary U.S. Control of the Iraqi government, right? U.S. ran Iraq, basically. And while U.S. was running Iraq in this period, they doled out contracts, big contract to Halliburton, paid with CPA-controlled Iraq oil revenues. So who controlled Iraq's oil revenues? Did the Iraqi people? No! The CPA controlled Iraq's oil revenues for that time. I'm not sure exactly how long they controlled it, but for a while, they controlled everything in Iraq. Right? Doling out big contracts to Halliburton. Outrage, they got a no-bid contract. So outrage led to a bidding competition, but Halliburton got the contract anyway. Now, reconstruction requires money, which requires either increased oil sales or bank loans. Bank loans make money off of interest. And they all got to be paid back with oil sales, both of which drive down oil prices, which benefits big oil companies and the overall economy. Now, there's a economist that says, no, that's not true. They're a hack, crackpot economist. All right, this is common sense stuff. Privatization of war has made wars even more profitable. A money-making bonanza. So privatization, right? not by government soldiers, right, but by private companies. Big profit potential for war. Privatization of logistics is called LOGCAP, Logistics Civilian Augmentation Program. All right. Privatization of soldiers is called Private Military Security Contractors. All right. This is euphemistic for mercenaries. There is mercenaries, right? It's a euphemism. Now, general reasoning arguments for this, right? Well, you're going to reduce the need for large standing armed forces, which are unnecessary during peacetime. You don't have to pay all the big costs for maintaining these large forces. However, the problem is the private companies don't maintain these capabilities during peacetime. And so in time of war, they have to rapidly scramble, throw things together ad hoc, usually by subcontracting out to other companies who themselves rapidly throw things together. They're not maintaining the capabilities during peacetime because it costs money and they can't afford it. So they scramble to throw things together. Or what happens is these subcontracted companies are total, complete startups out of the blue with no background, no resources, no infrastructure, no organization, right? No training, no planning. They just throw things together ad hoc and they fail. And it costs a lot more money. They're formed from nothing. Too many of these companies are fly-by-night profiteers. They're war profiteers who want to exploit the sudden deluge of money being tossed out during wartime. And that's old school classic. Whenever there's a big war, a lot of money's being thrown out for contracts here and there, and it's rich pickings for war profiteers, right? Some example problems, right? Inadequate weapons. They don't have. They're trying to collect and throw together, scramble to get weapons. Inadequate vehicles, inadequate equipment. You have unqualified personnel. You have no vetting of hired contractors and employees. You have no training program, no discipline program. A lot of these, for example, hired contractors are thrown together, formed in a group, and then sent out to battle that day. Right? No team coordination. Right? No leadership, structure there. It's problematic. A lot of them don't have the required skills. And even if they have the skills, there's a lot of problems with this. So they have no knowledge of required skills in some cases. They're hiring people who do not have the background skills. All right? No unit cohesion or regimental esprit. All right? All this results in failed or inadequate performance, failing the troops in the field, failing the real soldiers. Right. Now, another reason for privatizing is the general notion that private companies are always more efficient than government in terms of performance measured in quality and price. Now, in a classic free market, private company efficiency in terms of the quality over price ratio, I mean, that's what you want. You want to maximize the quality, minimize the price, so you want to maximize that ratio. That's enforced by the consumer, who is the purchaser. But in the military, the soldiers, who are the consumers, are not the purchasers, right? The soldiers don't have a say, so they cannot control quality of their support, right? Furthermore, cost plus contracts, right, which have a guaranteed profit margin, divorces quality from price. They're going to get the profits no matter what. It's set profit, guaranteed profit margins. That's what Halliburton got. 2% on every dollar that went to logistics went through Halliburton. Even if Halliburton didn't do a single thing, if Halliburton didn't lift a finger, except lift the phone and call another company and subcontract it out, they made a profit on every dollar that continued to flow through that. The soldier consumers were not paying for it. The government was, which made the Iraq invasion war a big socialistic. This is government, a socialist program, which is open to fraud, waste, abuse, graft, exploitation, big time, right? All the stuff you say socialist programs are a problem, right? This was socialistic. Don't give me these private companies. It was still fundamentally, holistically, structurally a socialistic program. Government doling out contracts. Divorce from consumer enforcement of quality, price, efficiency. It was the worst of socialism exploited by capitalist companies that were greedy to capture profits from all the money that is suddenly made available by war. Right? I mean, these companies start up with one or two guys getting together and say, hey, let's start a company. With nothing. They'll start up a private military security contractor company with nothing. They'll get a contract, then they'll throw it together. Ad hoc. So, for the Iraq invasion war, Halliburton was given an open-ended, cost-plus contract to control all logistics. Every single damn dollar that was spent on logistics went through Halliburton. Halliburton got a cut. Whether they did something or nothing. In other words, Halliburton tapped profits off of every single dollar that went to logistics. Now, Halliburton is owned by Dresser Industries, which is owned by Brown Brothers Bank, Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. Right? Dresser Industries is a Bush company. Prescott Bush was the chairman of the board way back when. George H.W. Bush worked for Dresser Industries. Neil Mallon, these guys were all bonesmen. Another Buddy Bonesman is a power club. He was CEO. Brown Brothers Bank was a bonesman bank. The founding partners, I think it was like 9 or so founding partners were all bonesmen. Here are some of the founding partners. Averill Harriman, the linchpin. His bank, after it merged with Brown Brothers Bank, was called Brown Brothers Harriman. Prescott Bush, Roland Harriman, Percy Rockefeller, Robert Levitt. He was on the war boards, industries board during World War I. He was an architect for the Cold War. He was mentor for McGeorge Bundy, who started the Vietnam War, who wrote the plan to start the Vietnam War with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. These guys are involved in all 20th century wars, and 21st century war, right? Bonesmen, right? And they're making big money off of war. Cheney doled out big, no big contracts to Halliburton during the first Gulf War. For example, one-way flight with packed airplanes, $10,000 per soldier, right? This is a time when, the cost probably should have been about no more than $250 per soldier. They're getting $10,000 per soldier, right? You can get a round-trip ticket back then to Israel and back for about $500, right? They're making a killing, and this is not a commercial plane with like 70%, passenger capacity, 60. This is 100% packed airplanes at $10,000 a pop, and that's just the start of it. Everything else they're supplying at outrageous no-bid contract prices, right? Massive profit margins. Cheney doled out a big contract to Halliburton to do a feasibility study on private military security companies, mercenaries, and of course Halliburton found that they would be effective. And then KBR was a big supplier of mercenaries, who is a subsidiary of Halliburton, right? Cheney then became CEO of Halliburton, right? So here's some examples of waste, fraud, and failed performance from cost-plus contracts. Cost-plus contracts incentivize waste, fraud, and abuse. All right? Now, economists will say, that's not true. Well, have you done the research? Right? Have you read any books on this? Have you read any of the testimony by people involved in this? So Halliburton supervisors would intentionally remove emergency repair parts and equipment from trucks, for example, spare tires, so that if they broke down during a convoy, the truck and all its cargo would be burned. Truck breaks down, they can't wait, They're in, dangerous. They got to keep the convoy going, right? So they just burn it, right? This would require the order of a brand new truck, which means more cost, and for every bit of cost, you get more profit. You get guaranteed profit. So if you increase the cost, right, you increase the profits, and then you got to replace the cargo, which means more cost, which means more profit. This is one of many ways cost plus contracts. This is one of cost plus contracts incentivize waste, fraud, and failed performance. Now, a large amount of empty trucks were sent on each convoy because Halliburton was paid per the truck, right? So there were reported cases in which most of the trucks in the convoy were empty. They would send a whole bunch of empty trucks. Why? Because they got paid per truckload, right? And what did that mean? That meant that the U.S. civilians who were contracted, now you got a truck driver who's making maybe $25,000 a year as a truck driver, making easily $100,000 over there, excessive cost, right? But these Americans are now put in harm's way, right? They're driving down roads that are at risk of being ambushed by insurgents, hit by IEDs and whacked by AK-47s, RPGs, whatever, right? Needlessly, so that Halliburton can make some more money. Now, whole cargoes of food would be carelessly left out in the heat, unrefrigerated, to rot, because it would have to be reordered at an additional cost, which is like no sweat off of Halliburton's brow, because they're making money off of this. It would be an additional cost, which would earn more profit. You see how corrupt this is? It structures in, makes profitable waste, fraud, and abuse. Halliburton would make big money off of doing nothing other than subcontracting, trucking to fly-by-night companies, and these companies would hastily hire drivers, right? Oftentimes they would not vet these drivers, and these drivers, you would have no mechanical expertise, right? They were sent to buy trucks from unscrupulous local dealers, like there was a bunch of Saudi truck dealers, right? These guys could not speak Arabic. They knew nothing about mechanical. They did not have the mechanical expertise, right? They would buy crappy trucks from these Saudi dealers. These trucks would break down, shoddy trucks, right? So that the truckers would buy shoddy trucks, which would break down, requiring the purchase of more trucks to replace them. But this would be an additional cost that would make additional profits for Halliburton, right? And then here's another one. Expensive SUVs were leased out at outrageous monthly rates. One reported case was $7,000. There's many cases of many thousands of dollars, $3,000, $4,000 per month. There's a case of $7,000 per month, right? I mean, what company is making this profit? I mean, you got to wonder. When, you get a standard, it's not an Escalade, but, a standard SUV. It leases out today at rates of like $400, $450, maybe $500 a month. Not $7,000 a month. And then what they did is they provided no oil change equipment, right? So the trucks would break down after like 10, maybe 15,000 miles, right? They would break, and what would they do? They would just burn the truck and pay for it, which would be an additional cost, which was okay because Halliburton would make a profit at the additional cost. Every dollar spent, they'd get a cut of. Guaranteed. Now, how is that increasing efficiency? It's doing the exact opposite. It's making great profits. It's a big ripoff. Now, large amounts of wrong computer equipment would be purchased, which would not be returned, but instead burned in big. They would dig big pits and then dump the computers in it and then pour fuel on them, diesel or gasoline, and then burn them on fire. And then they would replace them, order new computers, which would be a big cost, which would earn Halliburton another profit. Halliburton workers and other contractors were housed in luxurious resorts at exorbitant rates because the higher the cost, the more profit Halliburton would make. They house these guys at fancy resorts with wave runners, all sorts of fancy buffets, top flight chefs catering, 5-star hotels, right? And then overstaffing was common, with people hired to do nothing because their salaries paid to them were a cost, which would make Halliburton more profit. I mean, I've heard of cases where people basically did nothing all day long. And there are many reported cases of men hiring their girlfriends who did little or nothing other than shop or hang out at the pool, which is acceptable because it was a cost that made Halliburton more profit. All the while, there was failures in logistics support for the troops. Halliburton and their fly-by-night subcontractors would get the contract and then rush to hire people who were often totally unqualified. A lot of people totally unqualified in logistics, right, were hired. And Halliburton logistics was a nightmare, chaotic mess. For example, Halliburton got the contract to provide purified water to soldiers, right? Now, on the fly, they hired unqualified people to run a reverse osmosis water purification system who did not even understand how the system worked. They hired people who had no clue what's going on in the system. So what happened was this. Reverse osmosis systems use water pressure and a semi-permeable membrane to force pure water through the membrane so that all the pollutants cannot go through. Then the pure water on that side is extracted and used for drinking water. And then the polluted water should have been dumped in the sewer. But instead, they didn't understand what's going on in the system, so they took the now highly concentrated. So the water source was the Euphrates River, which is like a sewer itself. It's like a cesspool, right? It's nasty, toxic, polluted, right? Full of pathogens. And you send it through the reverse osmosis system. On one side you get pure water. On the other side you get super concentrated sewer water. And they didn't know that was super concentrated. So they sent that water to the water, they sent the pure water for drinking water, but the other water they sent for water for sinks and showers. So the soldiers were forced to brush their teeth and take showers in water that was super high concentrated pollution. They're much better off at just taking a bath in the Euphrates River, which is polluted. I mean, if that's not a failure, I don't. And another thing was there's no quality control. There's no testing on the water, right? And then when inspectors came, they found zero chlorine. They found the water just socked full of contaminants, pollutants, and pathogens, loaded with all sorts of pathogens. All sorts of microorganisms, not just bacteria, but also all sorts of parasites. And they're showering in it. They're brushing their teeth with this stuff. How's that helping the combat effectiveness of soldiers? And can you imagine the miserable existence, that's called? Halliburton, just the stench of that water. Halliburton would, on the fly, hire people with no background or skills in logistics, resulting in chaos and confusion and logistics failure, undermining support for the troops. Halliburton made their logistics system. Remember how I said they don't maintain their system in peacetime, right? Well, you save money because the Army doesn't maintain it, but Halliburton doesn't maintain it either. That's how they save money, right? They make it up on the fly. It's crap. It's chaotic. Now, the Army had developed a radio tag system, right, in which equipment and repair parts are tagged with a RFID chip. That's a radio frequency ID chip. So what this is a transponder that if you shoot a radio signal at it sends back a signal that identifies what it is. So you program the chip with a computer and say, okay, this is a transmission for a car, or this is a part for a helicopter, or parts for So this way, in these big warehouses were massive, right? All these parts going in day in day out, and it's a cluster, right? Right? It's a mess. So you can find stuff, you can locate things. Halliburton didn't use that. So instead, Halliburton warehouses became big black holes where parts were lost in piles, never to be found when needed. As a result, a lot of frontline helicopters, for example, failed to get repair parts to fly, so they couldn't provide vital ground support. All right, soldiers on the ground who need this. You had a lot of helicopters that couldn't fly. Now, here's another example. You know how I said, right? Halliburton doesn't even, run the trucking. They just hire subcontractors, and these subcontractors their companies formed on the fly. They hire people without vetting the truck drivers. So they would hire the cheapest people. They would often hire local Iraqi truck drivers, or I don't know, what other people, Saudi truck drivers. They were not vetted, and there were a number of instances where during a convoy, one of these truck drivers would veer off the road, drive off into the deserts, steal the entire contents of the truck, and then sell those goods on the black market. I mean, who knows what's in it? It could be military equipment. It could even be military weapons. Or it could be food, but it's making money. It's a loss. But that's okay, because that's an additional cost, which makes Halliburton an additional profit. If that's not a corrupt setup, I don't know what is. It's just set up for corruption. And then you got the private military security mercenaries, right? Poor combat capability of private military security. You're going to get people say, oh, they take people only that are super experts, they're Green Beret and special forces. Oh, bullshit. Now, in the diagram below on the left side, so this diagram here shows some of the factors, this very general overview of factors that go into affect a military force. Here's the material side, here's the human side. So it's about controlling resources. Material resources, human resources. For material, it's weapons design, production, maintenance, repair of those weapons and equipment, transportation, logistics, secure lines of communication. These are the material side. For the human side, it's things like recruiting, training, discipline, team building, morale is huge, small unit cohesion, which is morale, regimental esprit, culture, tradition, which results in a mutually reinforced identity of being, badass war fighters that are not going to back down and be cowards, right? It's socially reinforced discipline, right? You don't let your buddies down. You stand and fight hard. Right? Why? Because we're whoever, Marines, or we're special forces, whatever. Right? It creates an identity that's huge in creating war. Morale is what? The will to fight, the will to put your life on the line. That's not easy to build. Right? The biggest thing in this is hate. The best way of building morale is you create a detonator, you manufacture an incident, or there's a real defensive you get attacked. Right? Remember I told you how the Soviet military was crap? Throughout their history, Russia was crap. Until they're invaded, and then they're facing genocide. Oh, and then they fight well. Right? Goes into morale. You're going to fight because your life is on the line. You're going to die anyways. You better fight. You're facing Nazi genocide. All right. And then propaganda. Nationalism, fear-mongering, hate, all this stuff is huge for building morale, right? So, all these factors go into the quality of your soldiers. So let's take a look at how these private military security contractors fare out. Very often, contractors were hired with no combat training, only basic weapons training they received back in boot camp. All right, they could have been a truck driver. Their motivation is, man, I was in the military, right? I got basic weapons training. I want to make a big contract. It was far more important for private military security contractor companies to get bodies to fill contracts. Now, some of these guys may have had war combat experience, but a lot of them didn't, right? A lot of them didn't have much combat training. You know, they could have been a supply corps guy, which makes profit than to have qualified, experienced combat soldiers. Now, fly-by-night companies did not have a training program or a practice program to form unit coordination and teamwork, right? Or even communication skills, right? To interface with the U.S. military when they're needed to, the military's needed to save them. Nor did they have a discipline program like the elaborate NJP system in the military, or even get a command structure in the military. This resulted in uncontrolled soldiers who were reckless with civilian life. There's many cases where soldiers recklessly shooting at civilian cars, driving by randomly, right? A lot of wanton killing committed by a lot of atrocities, which only creates more radical fanatics, only creates more hate. That's a huge morale thing. But why do you want to do that? You're just making yourself a bigger problem. You're giving it to the enemy. You want to undermine the morale of the enemy. You want to undercut the will of fight. Right? These guys are creating a problem for the real soldiers. So commit atrocities, which only creates more radical fanatics, burning with hate and lusting to kill the real U.S. soldiers. So this puts U.S. soldiers at risk. The real U.S. soldiers are put at greater risk, creating more insurgents, more fanatics, more suicide bombers, right? This is anti-strategic. It's stupid, right? It's not about trying to be buddy-buddy. It's not like, oh, we gotta give soccer balls to these kids. Oh, bullshit. It's more about not creating hate. And if you want to really benefit these people, what you do is you benefit what they really need. You create some stability so that they can run their businesses. You help them to get water returned, electricity returned, something that helps their lives. You coordinate with them, with you fight alongside them, stopping insurgent attacks against their communities. Not trying to be buddy-buddy, handing out candy bars and crap. Winning their hearts and minds with candy bars and soccer balls. Bullshit. It's something real, something organic. It's partnering together, side by side, with something that they need. Helping them to establish security in their marketplace. Right? I mean, I taught you about Robbers Cave experiment. How if you have a common goal, right, and you got to share resources, you work together, that's when you forge unity. All right? All right. Anyways, so that's the idea. You want to build unity, that's how you do it. Right? So and then there's little cohesion in these units. Little or no cohesion. They're just slapped together ad hoc. There's no culture or tradition that creates regimental esprit. You know, for example, Marine Corps has got a very storied, you know, the Marine Corps is a large fighting force, right? You can get a large diversity of, you know, decent soldiers, you know, mediocre soldiers, crap soldiers. But, you know, pretty much to a man, Marine Corps produces solid warfighters largely due to the heritage, the ethos, the identity, long established, right? And, you know, these Marines, you know, once a Marine, they're always a Marine. They can be out of the Marine Corps for 40 years, they're still a Marine, right? Once a Marine, always a Marine. And this is due to that tradition, that culture. It creates that socially reinforced war-fighting attitude. Then we're not going to back down. We're going to fight. We're going to stand our ground. But we're not going to be stupid. If we got to do a tactical retreat, number one, what's the number one weapon of a soldier? His brain. Right? But it's about soldiers who are willing to fight. you get these fly-by-night, they don't have that. They don't have discipline. Nothing to enforce discipline. The fact that they're fighting for pay leads them to bounce right away. They're not fighting for their buddies. They're not fighting, for the man next to them. They're not fighting for a cause. They're not fighting for unit esprit. They're fighting because of a paycheck. So what do? They balance the risk that they're taking against their pay, which means, and that pay is certainly less than the value they place in their lives, right? So let's say they make $100,000, right? I mean, some of these guys made up for like $600,000, right? So let's say $100,000, right? All right. You get in a firefight, your life is worth more than $100,000. You're taking off and running if you can. If you're trapped, well, you're going to stand and fight because you're going to die anyways. But if you can take off and run, you're going to take off and run. And there's a lot of guys who fled fights, a lot of these mercenary contractors who fled fights saying, I'm not getting paid enough for this. I've read little cases where they said, I'm not getting paid enough for this. And they ran. They cut and ran. Contractors have often had to be saved by U.S. military forces, putting U.S. forces at risk. Contractors being underarmed with only small arms, right? Subcontracting out to unreliable locals. Here's an example. That's a glaring example. The Benghazi attack. When was that? 2000 and was that? When was that? Was that 2012? I forget. I think it was 2012. You had the contract to protect a U.S. diplomatic compound in Benghazi went to a British private military security contractor group called the Blue Mountain Group. They got a big fat payday, big fat wad of money in their pocket. And what did they do? Did they supply the soldiers? No! They just took it, flipped it, and subcontracted out to a local group militia called the February 17th Martyrs Brigade. All right? And then Ambassador Stevens was set to arrive on September 10th, right before the anniversary of 9/11. All right? And right before this, the February Martyrs Brigade suddenly quit. Right? They said, we're quitting. Right? So that left that compound almost totally unprotected. I think there was only a couple armed people. And it was largely CIA guys who had to go help protect over there, right? CIA contracted guys. They're contracted by the CIA, not by a private military. These guys were CIA hired employees. I mean, if that's the case, you got a better chance of hiring some decent people, right? Not by some private military security contractor corporation, which hires people on the fly to make a big paycheck. All right. So what happened was on September 11th, there was a big attack. Now almost totally undefended American compound, and then Ambassador Stevens was among those who were killed. All right. Private military security contractors subcontracting out. There are many cases of both extreme charges and unaccounted charges. Okay. And I'm just doing a quick, this is not a detailed analysis. I'm throwing down a lot of things off the top of my head. Stuff I know, facts I know. All right? I mean, it would go on forever if I gave a detailed accounting of this stuff. So private military security contractors earn between $600 a day to $2,500 a day based upon their skill background. Right? If they're highly qualified, special forces, they can get a lot. Right? But what does that translate to? Annual salaries of $156,000 on the low end to almost two-thirds of $1 million. Are you getting? I mean, this is a cost that goes, that makes Halliburton a profit. All right. So this is what a doctor makes. I mean, a private makes less than $20,000. You're paying for these crappy people at exorbitant salaries. How's that cost effective? They're not effective in a lot of cases as soldiers, as fighting forces. Yo, you're better off paying a private this money. You're far better off paying a private this money. Halliburton charged $99 per bag of laundry, which should cost what? $2 or $3 a bag? Literally $2 or $3 a bag. If you do this in high volume, $2 or $3 per bag. They're charging $99 per bag. Sodas. Here, one example. Sodas were purchased from local distributors, locally produced. Coca-Cola licenses, production of their whatever soda products, right? They're bought at $150 per case. They charge the government at $1.50 per can, not per case. A $4 price overcharge, right? They're charging $45 per 6-pack in some cases. And you had the Commission on War Contracting. This was a government study found that, quote, inattention to contingency contracting leads to massive waste, fraud, and abuse to the tune of $31 to $60 billion in Iraq and Afghanistan, along with repeated failures to meet contract and performance standards, jeopardizing U.S. defense, diplomatic, and development missions. Right? So not only are they costing way too much, they're failing in performance. Right? But it makes big money for Halliburton, a connected company, a Bush company. How is this American? This is anti-American. This is unpatriotic. This is a big ripoff. This is a big socialistic ripoff. Might as well be a communist country. Literally. Right? Alright. And then, here's one example. Halliburton had $1.8 billion in unsubstantiated food costs. They're making up, undocumented billing. Jacking up, overcharging. I mean, $31 to $60 billion. Think about that. That is fraud, waste, and abuse at a massive scale. Right? Alright, so weapon sales and reconstruction contracts help with balance of trade. That's another factor. Let's see here, wait. Where was that? Helps with balance of trade. Right, recycling of currency. Okay, so historic context. The Nixon administration pushed both weapon sales to Iran and the petrodollar. Remember I told you how I read the testimony of Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Commerce before Congress during the Reagan administration, how they're pushing hard to get Congress to authorize weapon sales to Iran. And stated reason was balance of trade. They needed for balance of trade recycling of currency. Exactly what I'm saying here. Petrodollar as a means of recycling currency to help with the balance of trade problem formed from the skyrocketing oil prices, exacerbated rising oil imports exacerbated by OPEC oil embargo, which sent oil prices soaring, that caused runaway inflation, right? On top of the Vietnam War-induced inflation. The Vietnam War was going on at that time. That caused pretty big inflation too. But oil prices is what is the camel that really just, the major factor was, boom, oil prices going way up. I showed you how it's correlated. Yeah. I showed you this is like almost perfect correlation. Look at that. You get an R number of, 0.9, 0.95 or something like that. It's a super strong correlation. All right, where are we at here? All right. So that inflation killed the economy. It's helping get inflation down. Petrodollar, right? Recycling currency helps prevent scarcity of capital in the domestic market, right? Keeping interest rates down. right? So what happens when you have imbalance of trade? You get a big, you have a divergence in markets as far as supply and demand of currency, right? Which causes problems. Recycling currency helps prevent a glut of currency in the foreign market, right? Which helps sustain dollar value there, which helps keep their prices down, thus promoting continuance of trade, right? And then, as prices go up, that causes a more depletion of U.S. dollars. So let's say it's oil, right? If currency is not recycled, you get a big buildup of dollars over there to the point where your dollar value falls. That means prices are going way up, which means you need more dollars to go over there, right? Which is making it even worse. So balance of trade is a big problem. Now, example I gave is how China recycles dollars today, right? Old historic example is how import tariffs way back during the Civil War would kill the southern cotton trade to the UK, right? And, that was a key driving force behind the war. Not freeing the slaves, which there was no move to free the slaves, no move in Congress, right? I don't want to get into all that again, right? They did everything to protect slavery, to appease the South, right? Don't tell me, Civil Wars fought to free the slaves. Oh, God. Flipping client states. A lot of money is made off of weapon sales when client states are flipped, right? So remember I told you how these were all Soviet client states. All of them were flipped, except for Syria. Yemen is kind of a mess, right? The big suppliers of weapons now during their civil war there are U.S. and Iran, right? I think Biden's trying to pull the U.S. out of the supplying weapons because it's fueling the genocide over there, right? He's saying screw it, right? We're not going to fuel the genocide. Okay. I think I didn't maintain much attention, but I kind of read a headline where Biden wants to pull back out of there, U.S. weapon supply out of there, which is probably a good idea. Hell, the Saudis are going to still keep supplying U.S. weapons down there. The Saudis aren't going to stop. Okay. All right, so the Middle East used to be littered with Soviet client states. All these underlying were Soviet client states. Now, the only one that remains is Syria, which is a fractured mess, with many nations supplying weapons, including U.S. to a small degree, but, Saudi supplying weapons, Qatar supplying weapons, Iran is supplying. This is a big proxy war against these Shia versus Sunni nations, all right? Turkey supplying weapons. Everyone has skin in the game there. Iran has skin in the game. Saudi has skin in the game there, right? Especially with potential pipelines running through Syria, right? For oil or gas. And then Turkey has the whole big skin in the game, especially with the Kurdish, what is it, RPK or something like that, the Kurdish, independence group inside of Turkey. What is that group? All the rest of the old Soviet client states have been flipped, mostly to the USA. The biggest arms dealer proliferator in the Middle East is now the USA by far. We're the ones who are flooding weapons in the Middle East. Okay? Now, you're going to get a comment saying, no, we're not. Oh, bullshit. Look it up. It's not rocket science. Look it up. Whose weapons do they use? What's in their arsenal right now? USA dominates. USA supplies a lion's share of weapons to the following nations: Lebanon, Iraq, Kuwait, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE. USA is roughly tied as the biggest supplier in the following nations: Israel. You could say USA supplies more because as far as cost, price per unit, aircraft are huge. F-35s, F-15s, F-16s. USA dominates near 100% Israeli Air Force. All they got is some old homemade stuff from the 1970s, like Kafir. I don't know if they're even operational. They could be retired. Kafir and they're old. I can't remember the name. The Mirage 5, the Nesher. Yeah, they stole the plans to make the Mirage 5 from France, and they built it on their own. Qatar, Oman, Yemen, right? I'm saying roughly the same as Iran here. I don't know exactly the amounts here, but if you look at Israel, Qatar, Oman, if you look at their weapons that they have in their forces right now, you can just roughly say it's split 50-50. U.S. is tied. Iran has plenty of U.S. weapons, but these weapons were supplied way back prior to the 1979 revolution. This is when the Shah was making big purchases of U.S. weapons. This is when the Nixon administration was pushing hard to get them to buy, to sell weapons to Iran to help the balance of trade. Some of the U.S. weapons were supplied to Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. Oh, yeah. So even after Iran is our big enemy, we're still supplying weapons. Right? It was winking and nod, supplying weapons throughout the entire war through Israel, right, to keep Iran in the fight. Right? And then the Reagan administration directly supplied weapons to Iran in Iran-Contra. The Reagan administration, for bogus reasons. I'm not going to teach all that. If you don't remember all the details behind that, it's too much to cover right now. Right? This is a big bullshit. This is meant to fuel the war. But I can't teach it all again. And that war proved what? It proved efficacious at bringing down oil prices. Only in Libya is the USA not supplying weapons. All right. Essentially, the U.S. Okay, so Libya, we played a big role in taking down Libya. U.S., French, it was NATO, right? French were big pushers of this because their currency was at jeopardy with Gaddafi switching to the dinar. Dinar. Your Arab currency, gold back, right? And then it threatened the petrodollar too, right? I think Obama was taken for a ride for the end of the war. USA is roughly some U.S. weapons were supplied. Okay, no, Libya. Essentially, the U.S. is by far the largest arms proliferator in the Middle East. The USA arms Middle East nations to the teeth. Case example: flipping Iraq as a client state. For many decades, Iraq had been a client state of the USSR and Russia, purchasing their weapons. Now they are a client state of the USA, buying F-16s, M1 Abrams, M109s. These are M109 mobile howitzers with 155 millimeter artillery. These are super sophisticated weapons here, highly complex weapons control, targeting systems here. M777 artilleries. These are very effective artillery batteries. MRAPs, Humvees, Hellfire missiles, Stinger missiles. These are drones, small drones. What are they called here? I forgot the names of these drones. Okay. So again, this is more profits from weapon sales, more oil being sold it helps drive down price, it helps with the balance of trade. All these factors go in. All right. This is common sense stuff. All right. Don't tell me, oh, I'm an economist. I say that's not true. If you're saying it's not true and you're an economist, you're lying. Right? The best you can say is, that's bullshit. General statement, this is all bullshit, without addressing any specific fact. All right. Now, to the extent the Middle East nations finance the war with loans, banks make big profit off of servicing loans. All right. Now, is that true? Right? You make interest. You make big profits. Right? Right? How do you deny that? I'm an economist. I say that's not true. Banks pay money to have people borrow their money. Unless you're the central bank in Japan, right? That's not true. Only Japan has negative interest rates. because they got this crazy deflationary problem. The central bank pays their member banks money to take money. Debt also leverages the sale of oil. All right. Yeah, remember I said that? You own debt. How do they pay back their debt? They sell oil. Right? So the idea with this is, way back during the 1970s, the 73 oil crisis, the embargo, and 79, oil was used as a weapon. But what happened was, by the 1980s, it was realized that they can use debt as a counter weapon. Debt became the weapon against the Middle East countries. Debt was used to leverage the sale of oil. Debt was used as a weapon. Right? Debt is huge. Right? Now, war in the Middle East can protect the petrodollar, which Nixon established in 1971. For example, in October 2000, Saddam Hussein abandoned the petrodollar for the euro. Now, the threat was not simply that Iraq abandoned the petrodollar, but it would set an example to be copied by all other nations. All right? And then if you have a flight away from the petrodollar, you got a big problem with inflation. Demand is falling. Why? Oil is purchased in large quantities every damn day to run the economy. Right? It's a huge source of demand. It's a huge source of currency demand. Right? Iraq had to be made an example. Without the petrodollar, expansion of the U.S. dollar supply to help finance debt spending. I mean, which is not done intentionally, but it's done otherwise, and nevertheless, right, can cause inflation, harming the economy. That's called monetizing the debt. And you know what? It happens. As the debt increases, bit by bit, it's monetized. Petrodollar is a hedge against inflation. That, in fact, was a primary reason why Nixon established the petrodollar. Now, three of the first actions by the U.S.-controlled Coalition Provisional Authority were de-Baathification, which created chaos in Iraq, destroyed their economy and their society, dismantling the Iraq military, which was huge at fueling the insurgency, and restoring the petrodollar. Three key things that did right away. Create a mess there, restore the petrodollar. So here's just a quick summary. Big spending for war. The biggest thing was the 2008 financial crisis. That was even bigger. And the stimulus package, right? But war was big too. In both Iraq and Afghanistan. And also Homeland Security you can add in there. Deficit spending, finance not with taxes but by debt. Treasury's got to sell bonds, right? Bond supply goes up, prices fall, relative return rates, interest rates go up, right? And to control interest rates, eventually what happens, debt is monetized. It's an expected and natural process, though not officially intended. Right, increases the money supply, increases inflationary pressure. One of the reasons why to fight to preserve the petrodollar. All right, as a quick summary, people who don't follow this will say, "That's crazy talk. I don't understand that. That's crazy talk." All right. Now, once again, the one thing they're going to shift all focus upon. I'm saying this. All right. So when you're monetizing the debt, you're creating more money. Creating more money is a transfer of wealth unless you don't have inflation. Right? Right? And petrodollar helps stave off inflation. Now, when you're creating more money, a lot of profit is made off of seigniorage. Right? The profit from making money, from nothing. So, here's the idea. If it takes 50 cents to make a $100 bill, well, $99.50 profit is made. But today, right, money is made not by printing money, but simply by typing it into the accounts in the Federal Reserve accounts. You just type it in, and you make money. That's all you're doing. A little electricity, a computer operator, whatever. I mean, there's more involved in that, but you're not even making anything physical. It's all cyber money. It's all electronic, right? And so there's huge seniorage. Now, according to the Federal Reserve Charter or law of 1913 or whatever it is, I think it was 1913, right? The Federal Reserve Bank is limited to getting 6% of net profits, but 6% is huge when it's the entire nation's money supply. So I'm saying that this is something that no one looks at. That in our system, why is it that a private bank gets to make money when in all other governments, it's a government bank? Why in our country does a private bank get to make money when it should be a government bank? Anyways, now out of all the things that I covered, all focus will be shifted on that, saying, that's crazy, that's conspiracy theory. Well, just think about it. They're limited to 6%, but they're still making a lot of money. Private people are forgetting to make money. All right, okay, I know that's going to be attacked. That's going to be, all focus is going to be shifted on that because it's the weak link, right? Now, the only other way to attack all the rest of this is to make a general attack. That's crazy! Big wave attack. Unbelievable! I don't remember a single thing you taught, so it's unbelievable. And that's how people attack. When they understand, retain nothing. Right? So, let's do a quick review. War in the Middle East can be highly profitable for the United States through rapid weapons consumption, which requires large purchases of weapons, which the United States sells. USA sells the lion's share of weapons in the Middle East, right? And that causes them to sell oil, or they take out loans. But eventually, they got to sell oil to pay it all back, right? Which causes oil prices to fall as you flood the market with oil, right? Which is huge profits for the big oil companies, right? And also for the economy as a whole. And you get to bust OPEC, which causes oil prices to fall even further by busting OPEC. I showed you that. You make big profits off of weapon sales. All right? We're 6. Now, by destabilizing the region with the war, you have big weapon sales to other nations not at war. And again, the USA sells the lion's share of weapons throughout the Middle East. I showed you that. Right? And they gotta buy the weapons by selling oil. And then you got a great amount of destruction in the countries at war, which requires a great amount of reconstruction. And there's great profits made off of that. Especially if your favorite companies like Halliburton, KBR, or Bechtel. Right? Plus, to pay for that, they gotta sell more oil. Alright? Now, this is all common sense stuff. Alright? How do you attack this? That's crazy. I'm an economist. I say that's crazy. No, this is common sense stuff. It's not rocket science. So, you sell more oil. Prices go down. I showed you how that happened. I showed you how that happened in the first Gulf War, or the Iraq War. The first Gulf War was OPEC being taken down. Okay, let's see here. What was 7, 8? Where's 8? All right, and then there's big money made off of LOGCAP. And this is corrupt as hell. I showed you. They get no bid contracts. They get cost plus contracts. It's just a setup for fraud, waste, and abuse. $31 to $60 billion of fraud, waste, and abuse. And failed performance at the same time. To who? The favorite companies, the Bush companies. Halliburton, KBR, Bush companies. Bechtel's a connected company. to security contractors. Failed performance, but big money made. This is a fleecing of the. This is socialist fleecing of the economy, right? In a capitalist system. These guys privatized. My ass. This is a total socialist arrangement. It's socialistic. It's a big ripoff. Helps with the balance of trade. I'm not going to explain all that again. You flip client states. We flipped Iraq, right? All the client states are now, they've gone to U.S. All of these have been flipped. Everything is now U.S. dominated. Protect the petrodollar, right? Right, that's one of the reasons. It's not the only. It adds to it. Don't tell me the petrodollar is not valid. Right? Don't tell me Nixon made that for no reason. All right. Don't tell me that a huge. I mean, I taught you the actual amount. It's huge. Petrodollar is large. It's a big chunk of our GDP. I forget exactly what it is. Petrodollar represents. What is it now? I don't know. I can't remember. It represents a huge demand for dollars. 12, 13. Okay, then all this was used to explain how, all the spending is financed with debt, right? And that all that can be inflationary, which is another reason why we need the petrodollar. It goes back to that too. All this spending, right? All right, so that's it. Hopefully you got something out of it. And I don't expect the average person to get it. If anyone, I expect highly intelligent people to take away something. Honest people. Hopefully some policymakers will see what's going on here. Right? Honest policymakers. And that's my hope. As far as the 99.9999% masses, I mean, I got like zero hope. They're not going to get anything. They're just going to listen to whatever the wave is saying. Right? The big wave. That's all they'll know about this. They won't follow anything. They won't retain anything. Right? But I'm hoping the rare few intelligent, honest policymakers will learn something from this. All right, that's it. Bye.